Catch-22 is a paradox that reflects the deep contradictions of human existence, especially within systems of power. It originates from the novel by Joseph Heller, where a soldier, trapped in a war, faces an impossible situation. The paradox goes something like this. In order to be grounded and not sent to fight dangerous missions, a soldier must prove they are insane. But if they want to be grounded, they must willingly ask for it. However, if they ask to be grounded, they show they are not insane, because only a sane person would try to avoid the dangers of war. Therefore, they cannot be grounded, because the very act of requesting it disqualifies them from doing so. At the heart of the Catch-22 lies an unresolvable loop, one that traps the individual within its logic. The rules are set in such a way that the soldier cannot escape. If they follow the rules, they are trapped by them. If they break them, they are punished. There is no way out. This paradox isn't just about war. It speaks to any situation where we are forced to play by rules that make no sense, yet we must follow them to survive. It makes us wonder, how often do we find ourselves in situations where the solutions to our problems seem to be the problem themselves? Catch-22 also speaks to the power dynamics inherent in systems. It's not just about individual struggles, but about the forces that create these paradoxes in the first place. In a world shaped by bureaucracy, institutions, and the demands of others, we often find ourselves stuck in situations where the very structure that is supposed to help us leaves us with no way out. As we sit with this paradox, we begin to see its broader implications. We realize that the Catch-22 isn't just a relic of a fictional war, but a symbol of how systems, whether personal, political, or societal, can ensnare us in contradictory and unjust ways. It challenges our sense of freedom, reminding us that sometimes the biggest obstacle to progress is the very structure that's meant to support us. Imagine for a moment how it might feel to live in a world where every solution leads only to more problems. To be told that you can choose your fate, but only if you don't choose it. To be confronted with a reality where every option comes with its own contradiction. In such a world, it becomes hard to see where agency begins and where it ends. Yet within this paradox, there is also something deeply human. Catch-22 highlights our resilience, our ability to survive despite being caught in a system that seems designed to break us. It reminds us of the strength it takes to keep moving forward, even when every step feels like we are walking in circles. And perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of the Catch-22, to recognize the paradox within ourselves. We may find ourselves in situations where the answers aren't clear, where the solutions are tangled with their own contradictions. And yet, it is in accepting this uncertainty that we learn to navigate the world more thoughtfully. By acknowledging that some paradoxes cannot be resolved, we make room for new ways of thinking, new ways of being. In the end, the Catch-22 may never offer a clear solution, but by contemplating it, we find a deeper understanding of the systems we live within, and perhaps a gentler way to move through them.
Schrödinger's cat is one of the most famous paradoxes, illustrating a situation that defies common sense. Imagine a cat in a sealed box. Inside the box, there's a mechanism that can kill the cat based on the decay of a radioactive atom. The atom has a 50% chance of decaying within a set time. If it decays, the mechanism releases poison, killing the cat. If it doesn't decay, the cat remains alive. Here's the paradox. Until you open the box and check, the cat is considered both alive and dead. It exists in this strange state, called a superposition, because the atoms decay, and thus the cat's fate is tied to quantum mechanics, where outcomes are probabilities until observed. Opening the box collapses the superposition into one reality. The cat is either alive or dead. But before that moment, it's both. This idea feels impossible. How can something be alive and dead at the same time? The paradox challenges how we think about reality. It forces us to ask, Is the cat's state real before we observe it? Or does observation create the reality we see? Schrödinger's cat blurs the line between what's possible and what's observable, leaving us with more questions than answers. This paradox becomes even more perplexing when we consider its implications. What does it mean to exist in two states at once? On one hand, it's easy to dismiss this as a mere thought experiment, confined to the abstract world of quantum mechanics, but the idea of superposition forces us to rethink how reality operates on the smallest scales. In everyday life, things are either one way or the other. A light is on or off, a door is open or closed, a person is awake or asleep. Schrödinger's cat turns this intuitive certainty on its head. Imagine peering into the box but pausing just before lifting the lid. The cat's life hangs in a state of paradox. In one sense, it is an ordinary animal, subject to the same physical laws that govern all living things. But in the context of this experiment, it becomes a symbol of something far stranger, the coexistence of opposing truths. The paradox teases us with the idea that reality might not be as straightforward as it seems. The longer we sit with this paradox, the more unsettling it becomes. If observation determines reality, then what role do we play in shaping the world around us? Are we passive witnesses to an already existing truth, or do we actively participate in creating the outcomes we observe? Schrödinger's cat invites us to consider the possibility that observation is not just a neutral act, but a decisive one. By opening the box, we impose a kind of finality on the cat's state. Without this act, the cat's existence remains a question mark, a living contradiction. The paradox also raises deeper questions about the nature of knowledge itself. Can we ever truly know something without observing it? And if observation alters what we seek to understand, does it mean that knowledge is always incomplete? Schrödinger's cat does not offer easy answers to these questions. Instead, it confronts us with the limits of our understanding and the strange, elusive nature of truth. Imagine scaling this paradox up to encompass more than just a single cat. What if entire systems, entire worlds, existed in this liminal state of possibility? Schrödinger's cat might be confined to a box in our minds, but its implications stretch far beyond. It challenges us to think about the boundaries of reality and to grapple with the idea that those boundaries might not be fixed. The paradox also brings into focus the role of uncertainty in our lives. Just as the cat exists in a state of superposition, we often find ourselves in situations where outcomes are unclear. We make decisions, take risks, and move forward without knowing for sure what lies ahead. Schrödinger's cat, in its peculiar way, mirrors this human experience. It reminds us that uncertainty is not just an abstract concept. It is a fundamental part of existence. As we reflect on this paradox, it's worth considering how it might shape our perspective on life. The cat's dual state forces us to confront the unknown, to sit with ambiguity, and to question the assumptions we take for granted. In doing so, it invites us to adopt a mindset of curiosity and openness. Instead of rushing to resolve the paradox, we might learn to embrace it, to see it not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be explored. Schrödinger's cat may never offer a definitive answer to the questions it raises, but perhaps that is precisely its value. It pushes us to think more deeply, to question more boldly, and to accept that some truths might forever remain out of reach. And in a world that often demands certainty, this paradox offers a refreshing reminder of the beauty of the unknown. The friendship paradox is a curious reflection on the nature of social connections and the way we perceive our relationships with others. It suggests that, on average, your friends have more friends than you do. At first glance, this seems strange. How can it be that we, surrounded by our own network of friends, are somehow the exception in this strange pattern? If you think about it, each person's friends are part of a larger web of connections. The people we consider our close friends are often more social, with broader networks, than we are. They know more people, interact with more people, and form deeper ties in the world around them. paradox here is subtle but profound. While we might feel we are well connected within our social circles, we are often unaware of the extent to which our friends themselves are plugged into even wider circles. This creates an imbalance where our personal sense of friendship doesn't align with the statistical reality of it. Imagine for a moment that you could zoom out and look at the social networks of all the people you know. If you looked at your friends' friends, you would often find that they have more connections than you do. These connections might not always be obvious to you. Your friends may have overlapping circles with others, creating a complex web of interactions and relationships. This paradox highlights the idea that our individual social reality is just a small part of a larger, interconnected whole. This brings us to the deeper question. What does it mean to have many friends? Does the number of friends we have reflect our own worth or our place within a network? Or is it simply a matter of perspective, shaped by the networks we move in? The friendship paradox encourages us to reflect on our place within the webs of connection that define our social lives. It forces us to ask, are we truly as isolated as we feel? Or are we just not seeing the full extent of the connections around us? When we feel disconnected, it may be because we are not aware of the larger, interconnected world of relationships that exists just beyond our immediate circle. The paradox teaches us that our sense of isolation might be less about the reality of our social world and more about our limited view of it. At first, it might feel unsettling to realize that our close relationships are not as central as we imagine them to be. There's a certain vulnerability in recognizing that, in the grand scheme of things, we are just one small node in a vast social network. But there's also something deeply freeing in that awareness. By accepting that our friendships exist within a broader context, we can learn to appreciate them for what they are: unique, meaningful connections that bring depth and value to our lives, even if they are part of a larger, more complex web. There is also an element of humility in the friendship paradox. It reminds us that no matter how close we may feel to those around us, we are still part of a much larger system that we can't always perceive. It's a humbling thought to realize that we are not as central to the social world as we might imagine, and that the people we care for are often embedded in networks far beyond our reach. The paradox invites us to recognize that social connections are not always about proximity or closeness. They are also shaped by a far-reaching, often invisible network of influences and relationships. At the same time, this paradox invites us to think more deeply about the nature of friendship itself. It raises the question, what does it mean to truly be connected to another person? Is it enough to be a part of someone's life? Or do we need to also recognize the larger network of relationships that exist around them? Friendship, then, becomes not just a matter of personal connection, but of understanding the broader, interconnected nature of social bonds. This paradox also leads us to consider the idea of social influence. If our friends have more friends, it suggests that the influence we experience from them is not just limited to our own interactions, but is shaped by the broader network of their relationships. In this way, friendships extend beyond the people we know directly, touching on the invisible ties that bind us all together. When we share an experience with a friend, we are also sharing that experience with the people they are connected to, even if we don't know them personally. The impact of a single friendship can ripple out into a much larger web of connections. The deeper we go into the friendship paradox, the more we realize that our social networks shape us in ways we might not even understand. The connections we form don't just influence our own lives, they also influence the lives of others, often in ways that are invisible to us. In this sense, our social world is a living organism, constantly shifting, growing, and evolving, shaped by the complex interactions of its many parts. Our friendships are not isolated events. They are part of a larger, dynamic process of connection and influence. As we sit with the friendship paradox, it's worth thinking about the dynamics of your own relationships. Are there people in your life whose networks of friends you never fully see? Do you sometimes feel isolated, not realizing the far-reaching social webs that connect you? Perhaps this paradox teaches us to expand our view of what friendship really is, not as a static thing confined to the individuals we know, but as part of a living, breathing network that we are all woven into. In many ways, the friendship paradox mirrors the way we experience the world around us. We are all part of larger systems, whether in our personal lives, our communities, or our societies, that shape our experiences in ways we cannot always see. Just as our friendships are interconnected with the friendships of others, so too are our lives intertwined with the lives of those around us, in ways both visible and invisible. Ultimately, the friendship paradox doesn't offer a clear resolution, but perhaps it isn't meant to. It challenges us to think more expansively about the nature of our connections and to recognize the beauty of the networks we're part of, even if they are not always visible to us. And in this way, it reminds us that the ties that bind us are often more expansive and more intricate than we might first realize. In the end, it is not the number of friends we have that defines us, but the depth and authenticity of the connections we form within the web of life. The bootstrap paradox is a mind-bending thought experiment that challenges our understanding of time, causality, and the nature of reality itself. It invites us to consider a scenario where something exists without ever having been created, like a loop that spirals inward upon itself, making it impossible to trace its origins. Imagine this. A person travels back in time and gives Shakespeare a copy of his works, telling him to publish them as his own. Shakespeare, in turn, publishes the works, and they become famous. The person then travels back to the future, with no memory of where the works came from, and brings them to Shakespeare, repeating the cycle. The paradox here is clear. Who is the true author of Shakespeare's works? They appear to exist without any original creator, as though they've always been in the world, looping back upon themselves. This paradox doesn't just stretch the limits of our understanding of time. It makes us question the very nature of creation itself. If something has no origin, if it exists in a loop where cause and effect are reversed or entangled, how do we reconcile the idea of a linear, progressive reality? The bootstrap paradox asks us to look beyond our usual understanding of how time and causality function, inviting us into a world where events fold in on themselves, creating a tangled web of reality that we cannot easily untangle. To truly sit with the bootstrap paradox, we must confront the uncomfortable notion that our intuitions about cause and effect may not be as reliable as we think. In our everyday experience, we see events unfold in a linear fashion. Causes lead to effects, and outcomes follow a clear trajectory. But what if that trajectory isn't as straightforward as it seems? What if time itself is more fluid than we've been led to believe? And events are not just a series of connected moments, but part of a larger cyclical pattern that loops endlessly upon itself. The more we reflect on this paradox, the more it challenges the very fabric of reality. If something can exist without an origin, does that mean that time, too, might not be as rigid as we've been taught? The bootstrap paradox forces us to ask deep, existential questions. What is the true nature of time? Can the past influence the future in a way that causes a loop, or is that kind of circular causality impossible? And if it is possible, how do we understand the flow of events in a world where the past and future are not as clearly separated as we might think? This paradox also touches on the question of free will. If events are tied up in a never-ending loop, what role do we play in shaping them? Are we simply actors following a script, or do we have the power to break free from the cycle and create new outcomes? The bootstrap paradox forces us to reconsider the role of choice in a world where time doesn't move in a straightforward linear path. Perhaps we are not as free as we imagine, or perhaps the freedom we seek exists within the confines of the loop itself. As we sit with the bootstrap paradox, we begin to see its implications beyond just the realm of time travel or theoretical physics. It invites us to think about the ways in which our own lives might be intertwined in loops of causality that we cannot fully understand. Are there moments in our lives that repeat, that echo back upon themselves, shaping us in ways we can't quite perceive? How often do we experience events that feel like they've been shaped by a future we can't yet understand, or a past we can't fully trace? The paradox also raises questions about knowledge and creation. If something exists without a clear origin, does that change our understanding of what it means to create something new? Can we truly create anything, or are we merely reshaping what has always been in ways we can't fully grasp? The bootstrap paradox, in its complexity, forces us to rethink the very idea of creation as something that might not be as linear or intentional as we imagine it to be. Imagine for a moment living in a world where every event is a loop, where every decision we make is both a cause and an effect, entwined in a never-ending cycle of time. In such a world, the lines between past, present, and future blur, and the very concept of origin becomes meaningless. What does it mean to live in such a reality, where everything is both predetermined and yet constantly being remade? The bootstrap paradox reminds us that reality is not always as simple as it seems. It reveals the limitations of our understanding, showing us that the world may be far more complex, far more entangled than we can imagine. Time, creation, and causality may not be as straightforward as we like to believe, and in this realization, we are invited to let go of our certainty, to embrace the mystery, and to sit with the unsettling beauty of the unknown. In the end, the bootstrap paradox does not provide easy answers, but perhaps that's part of its power. By presenting us with a reality where causes and effects become indistinguishable, it encourages us to question the very nature of time and existence. And in doing so, it offers us the opportunity to see the world not as a series of disconnected moments, but as part of a vast interconnected web of possibility, where the boundaries of time are far more fluid than we can imagine. The paradox of choice is a modern paradox that speaks to the overwhelming abundance of options we face in today's world. It suggests that the more choices we have, the less satisfied we often become with the decisions we make. At first, we might assume that more choices would lead to greater freedom and happiness, but the paradox reveals that too many options can create anxiety, indecision, and regret. Imagine walking into a store to buy a jar of jam. In the past, there might have been a handful of flavors to choose from, and the decision was relatively straightforward. But today, you might face an entire aisle filled with dozens, maybe even hundreds of options, each one slightly different from the next. The choice of which jam to buy suddenly becomes a daunting task, one that leaves you questioning whether you've made the right decision. Even after you've chosen, you might wonder if one of the other jams would have been better. This is the paradox of choice. As our options grow, so do our expectations and doubts. The simple act of choosing becomes laden with pressure as we begin to feel that we must make the best choice. The more choices we face, the more we begin to worry about what we might be missing out on, leading to a sense of dissatisfaction that only grows as the number of options increases. At the heart of this paradox lies the tension between freedom and choice. We like to believe that having more choices gives us more freedom, but in reality the opposite can be true. When faced with too many options, we can feel overwhelmed, trapped by the very freedom we sought. We become paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice, and that fear can prevent us from enjoying the process of making decisions altogether. In a world that celebrates abundance and infinite possibilities, the paradox of choice challenges our assumptions about what truly brings happiness. We live in an era where we can access nearly anything at the touch of a button, yet the constant bombardment of options leaves us feeling less satisfied, less content, and more burdened by the choices we make. It's as if, in our quest for the perfect decision, we've lost the ability to enjoy the imperfect, spontaneous choices that once brought us joy. Imagine for a moment how different life might feel if we had fewer options. What if, instead of standing in front of a wall of jam jars, we had just 3 choices, each one equally good? The decision would likely feel easier, less stressful. There would be less pressure to make the perfect choice, and we might feel more content with the decision we've made. In this simpler world, we might find more peace, more satisfaction, and more room to enjoy the things we've chosen. The paradox of choice forces us to confront the reality that choice, in excess, can be a source of stress rather than freedom. It invites us to reflect on how we've become addicted to the idea of having endless options, and whether this obsession with choice has actually led us to a deeper sense of dissatisfaction. The more we try to control our lives through choice, the more we may find ourselves trapped in a cycle of indecision, regret, and missed opportunities. As we reflect on the paradox, we begin to see how it manifests not only in the small, everyday decisions we make, but in the larger choices of our lives. From career paths to relationships, we are constantly presented with a multitude of options, each one carrying the weight of possibility. The more choices we have, the more we question whether we are making the right ones. We wonder if we should have chosen differently, if there was something better out there waiting for us. This constant questioning can lead to a sense of paralysis, where we become afraid to make any decision at all. The fear of making the wrong choice can hold us back from moving forward, preventing us from taking risks or exploring new opportunities. We become so focused on the fear of regret that we forget to enjoy the present moment, to appreciate the journey we're on, and to trust in our ability to make good decisions. The paradox also speaks to the role of expectations in our decision-making. When we have too many options, our expectations can rise, and the pressure to make the perfect choice becomes even greater. This sense of expectation can cloud our judgment and make it harder to appreciate the choices we've made. We begin to focus on what we might have missed rather than enjoying what we have. In a world that constantly offers more options, the paradox of choice reminds us that there is wisdom in simplicity. By narrowing our choices, by learning to embrace the imperfect and the limited, we can free ourselves from the weight of expectation and dissatisfaction. We can learn to appreciate the choices we've made, to embrace the uncertainty that comes with them, and to find contentment in the paths we've chosen, even if they are not the perfect ones. The paradox also challenges us to reconsider our relationship with materialism and consumerism. In a society that constantly encourages us to upgrade, to buy more, to choose the newest and best, we are left feeling as if we are never quite satisfied. No matter how many things we acquire, how many decisions we make, the sense of fulfillment remains elusive. The paradox of choice reveals the emptiness of this pursuit, suggesting that true happiness does not come from having more options, but from learning to embrace the options we have and finding contentment in what we already possess. In a way, the paradox of choice calls us to redefine what it means to live a fulfilling life. It challenges us to let go of the myth of the perfect decision and to accept the beauty of imperfection. It asks us to recognize that satisfaction comes not from endless options, but from making a choice and committing to it fully, without the constant fear of missing out on something better. In doing so, it frees us from the pressure to find the perfect path and invites us to enjoy the one we are on. The paradox of choice may not offer a simple solution to the overwhelming array of options we face every day, but it provides us with a powerful reminder that sometimes less is more. By simplifying our choices, by embracing the uncertainty and limitations of life, we might find a deeper, more lasting sense of satisfaction and joy in the decisions we make. The Sorite's paradox, often referred to as the paradox of the heap, is a philosophical puzzle that confronts the nature of vague concepts and challenges our understanding of gradual change. The paradox invites us to ponder the question, at what point does a heap of sand cease to be a heap and become, instead, just a collection of individual grains? Imagine you have a large pile of sand, and you begin removing grains one by one. With each grain you take away, the pile becomes slightly smaller. At what exact moment does this once substantial heap of sand become something that no longer qualifies as a heap at all? If you take away one grain, it's still a heap, and the same might be true after several more grains are removed. But as you continue to remove them, at some point the pile becomes too small to be considered a heap, or does it? The paradox arises because it's difficult to pinpoint the precise moment when the heap loses its identity. The Sorites paradox is not confined to sand, but touches on many areas of life where we deal with concepts that lack clear boundaries. Concepts like bald, rich, tall, or old. For instance, when does a person stop being young and become old? Is it the moment they turn a certain age, or is it a gradual shift where the changes accumulate until the label no longer fits? How many grains of change must accumulate before something ceases to be what it once was? This paradox forces us to confront the limitations of language and classification. We often use labels to make sense of the world, but these labels are inherently vague and imprecise. The Sorites paradox highlights how difficult it is to define a boundary between categories that seem to be based on gradual, continuous changes rather than abrupt shifts. Our intuitions about when something transitions from one state to another are often blurred and subjective. At its core, the Sorites paradox asks us to reconsider the assumptions we make about categories and definitions. We tend to think of the world in terms of neat, distinct categories. A person is either tall or short, young or old, rich or poor. But in reality, these categories are often arbitrary and fluid, existing on a spectrum rather than in discrete boxes. The paradox forces us to question whether such binary thinking is useful or even accurate in describing the world around us. This paradox also touches on the concept of change itself. How do we recognize when something has changed? If the process of change is gradual, as in the case of the sand heap, can we ever truly say that something has undergone a transformation? Or do we simply notice the change when it reaches a certain threshold, even if that threshold is arbitrary? The Sorites paradox compels us to reflect on how we understand and measure change in our own lives. We may find ourselves wondering at what point a series of small decisions, small steps, or small moments accumulate to create a larger transformation. At what point, for example, does a small habit become a life-altering routine? As we sit with the Sorites paradox, we are reminded of the complexity of our own lives. How often do we find ourselves in situations where small, seemingly insignificant actions accumulate over time, and we only realize their impact once a tipping point has been reached? It may be the slow accumulation of years that turns youth into age, or the gradual buildup of small financial decisions that result in wealth or poverty. In such moments, the boundaries of what is and isn't, or what is and isn't possible, become less clear. The Sorites paradox forces us to reflect on the blurry, indistinct nature of life itself. In a way, the paradox speaks to the human desire for certainty. We want to be able to draw clear lines, to say when something is definitively one thing or another. Yet the Sorites paradox reminds us that many of the most important aspects of life resist such easy categorization. Our understanding of what constitutes a heap or a pile, or when someone becomes old or young, is often subjective and dependent on perspective. There is no precise moment when one thing transforms into another, only a gradual shift that might go unnoticed until we step back and view the larger picture. This paradox also suggests that the boundaries we create in our minds, the labels we apply to ourselves and others, are often more fluid than we realize. The moment we call someone rich might not be as fixed as we think. They might have a little more money today than yesterday, but when does that additional wealth cross the threshold into true richness? Similarly, when does a person's sense of self-worth shift from confidence to arrogance, or from modesty to insecurity. These boundaries are often arbitrary and subjective, defined more by perception than by any objective measure. The Sorite's paradox also invites us to think about the way we make decisions. How do we decide when enough is enough? How do we determine when we've accumulated enough knowledge, wealth, or success to feel satisfied? Or when we've experienced enough change to call something a transformation? The paradox suggests that the point of change is rarely as clear as we expect. It encourages us to embrace the uncertainty and ambiguity of life's transitions rather than seeking rigid, definitive answers to these questions. Consider, too, the implications of the Sorite's paradox on personal growth. If change is gradual, how can we track our own progress? The small, incremental steps we take may not seem significant in the moment, but over time they can accumulate into profound transformations. The paradox reminds us that growth doesn't always happen in clear, noticeable moments. Instead, it's often a slow, subtle process that builds up piece by piece until we realize how far we've come. As we reflect on this paradox, it becomes clear that the Sorite's paradox is not just a puzzle for philosophers. It is a lens through which we can examine the nuances of our own lives. It asks us to confront the gray areas, to appreciate the subtleties of change, and to accept that the boundaries we draw around ourselves and our world are not always as precise as we'd like them to be. In doing so, it encourages us to embrace ambiguity, to sit with the complexity of life's transitions, and to find meaning not just in the clear-cut moments, but in the gradual shifts that make up our experience. The Sorite's paradox does not offer easy answers, but perhaps that is the point. It challenges us to think deeply about the nature of change, about how we define and categorize the world around us, and about the limits of our understanding. It invites us to see life as a continuous flow, where labels are fluid, and where the process of change is often more important than the moment of transformation itself. The grandfather paradox is a classic thought experiment that challenges our understanding of time, causality, and the very nature of existence. It centers around the idea of time travel and the potential contradictions that arise from the ability to travel backward in time. The paradox asks, what happens if you travel back in time and prevent your own grandfather from meeting your grandmother, thereby preventing your own birth? Imagine for a moment, you have the ability to travel back in time. You go to the past and, in a series of unlikely events, you prevent your grandfather from ever marrying your grandmother. Without that union, your parents never meet, and you are never born. But if you were never born, how could you have traveled back in time in the first place? How could you have altered the course of events if you never existed to make that change? This is the essence of the grandfather paradox. It seems to defy logic, presenting a situation where cause and effect spiral into a loop of contradiction. If you prevent your birth, then you cannot travel back in time to prevent your grandfather's marriage, and if you cannot travel back in time, then you are born, and the paradox begins anew. It creates an inescapable loop, one where the past, present, and future are locked in an entangled, paradoxical relationship that challenges our conventional understanding of time. The grandfather paradox forces us to confront the limits of our understanding of time and causality. In our everyday experience, we view time as a linear progression, where actions have consequences that unfold in a predictable, chronological order. But time travel introduces a wrinkle in this understanding, suggesting that events in the past could be altered, causing a ripple effect that changes the future. The paradox asks us to consider what happens when the future is dependent on actions that have already been undone by a time traveler. At its core, the grandfather paradox invites us to reflect on the nature of time itself. Is time truly a straight line, with each moment following naturally from the one before? Or is it more like a tangled web, where every action can have far-reaching effects, and where the past and future are not as neatly separated as we might like to believe? The paradox challenges the assumption that time is fixed, urging us to think of it as something more fluid, more subject to change and influence than we might have imagined. The paradox also raises important questions about the role of choice and free will. If you can travel back in time and alter the course of events, does this mean that the future is not set in stone? Can you change the past, or are there limits to how much you can influence the timeline? The grandfather paradox suggests that, at least in the case of time travel, our choices might not always lead to the outcomes we expect. The possibility of changing the past comes with profound implications for the future, and the paradox reveals the complexity of causality when time is no longer a simple, linear progression. Consider the implications of this paradox on our own lives. We often think of the past as something fixed, something that cannot be undone. But what if, in some sense, our understanding of the past is more fluid than we realize? What if every action we take, every decision we make, creates ripples that alter the course of our lives in ways we cannot fully understand? The grandfather paradox invites us to reflect on the interconnectedness of time, asking us to consider how our choices might influence not only our future, but the past as well. This paradox also forces us to grapple with the limitations of our understanding of reality. Time travel, while still a hypothetical concept, points to the deeper question of whether our perception of reality is as stable and unchanging as we think. If events can be undone, rewritten, or altered, does this mean that reality itself is more fragile than we believe? Are the events of our lives, the relationships we form, and the actions we take as permanent as we assume, or are they subject to forces beyond our control? As we reflect on the grandfather paradox, we are reminded of the fluidity of time and the uncertainty that surrounds our understanding of the universe. We live our lives as if the past is immutable, as if what has happened cannot be undone. But the paradox invites us to imagine a world where the past, present, and future are more intertwined than we think, where the actions we take today could have been influenced by the choices we made in another timeline. It challenges us to embrace the possibility that time, like everything else, is not fixed, but rather subject to forces that we do not fully understand. There is also something deeply unsettling about the grandfather paradox. It forces us to confront the possibility that our existence, our very lives, could be part of a loop, a pattern that repeats itself over and over in ways we cannot control. If we are part of a universe where the past can be altered and the future is uncertain, where does that leave us? Do we have any true agency over our lives, or are we simply passengers on a ride that loops back on itself, trapped in the paradox of time? The paradox also touches on the idea of determinism versus free will. If our actions in the past can change the future, does this mean that our future is not set in stone? Or are we destined to follow a certain path, one that is determined by events that we cannot change? The grandfather paradox invites us to consider whether the future is malleable, or if our actions are merely part of an inevitable cycle that we cannot escape. The very idea of time travel and the paradox it creates speaks to a deep human longing, the desire to understand and control time itself. We imagine that if we could only go back and fix certain moments in our past, we could change the course of our lives. But the grandfather paradox challenges this desire, suggesting that time is far more complex than we think, and that even our attempts to alter the past could create even more complex and paradoxical consequences. As we sit with the grandfather paradox, we are forced to confront the limits of our understanding of time, causality, and reality itself. The paradox does not offer easy answers, but it opens the door to deeper questions. Questions about the nature of existence, the interconnectedness of past, present, and future, and the true role of free will in a universe that may not be as predictable as we once believed. It reminds us that time, like everything else, is a mystery, one that may never be fully unraveled. and that we must approach with curiosity, humility, and wonder. The liar paradox is one of the most enduring and perplexing puzzles in philosophy and logic. It arises from a simple, yet deeply unsettling statement. This statement is false. At first glance, this might seem like an ordinary assertion, but upon closer examination, it reveals a profound contradiction that challenges our understanding of truth, language, and self-reference. To understand the paradox, consider the statement itself. This statement is false. If the statement is true, then what it says must be the case, meaning the statement is indeed false. But if the statement is false, then it must be true, because that is what it claims. This creates a loop, a situation where the statement cannot consistently be true or false, and yet it must be either one or the other. The liar paradox confronts us with a kind of logical trap, one that has no simple resolution. The paradox forces us to ask, what does it mean for something to be true? In our daily lives, we often rely on the assumption that truth is a fixed, stable concept. A statement is either true or false, and we can generally determine which is the case based on the evidence or the rules of logic. But the liar paradox disrupts this binary understanding, suggesting that truth may not be as straightforward as we believe. If a simple statement can simultaneously be true and false, what does this say about the nature of truth itself? At the heart of the liar paradox is the problem of self-reference. The statement, "This statement is false," refers to itself, creating a loop that makes it impossible to assign a consistent truth value. This self-referential nature of the paradox invites us to reflect on the limitations of language and logic. How can we express truth when language itself is capable of generating contradictions? The liar paradox shows us that language, while powerful and useful, is not always a perfect tool for capturing the complexities of reality. It raises the question of whether there are limits to what can be meaningfully said or known, and whether some truths are beyond our grasp. The paradox also invites us to explore the nature of contradictions. In our everyday lives, we often think of contradictions as signs of error or confusion. If something is true, it cannot also be false. But the liar paradox suggests that contradictions can be more than just mistakes. They can be fundamental to how we understand the world. By embracing the paradox, we are forced to reconsider our assumptions about logic and truth, and to acknowledge that some contradictions may not be resolvable in the way we expect. As we sit with the liar paradox, we are reminded of the complexity of the concepts we take for granted. Truth, meaning, and logic are not always as clear-cut as we might think. The paradox forces us to confront the fact that our understanding of these concepts is limited by the very tools we use to define them, language and logic themselves. The liar paradox challenges us to question the foundations of our reasoning and to recognize that there may be limits to what we can know or express. Consider, too, the implications of this paradox for our understanding of self-awareness. The liar paradox, in its self-referential form, reflects the way we often think about ourselves. We create narratives about our lives, telling ourselves who we are and what we believe. But what happens when those narratives contradict themselves? How do we reconcile the conflicting stories we tell about ourselves, the truths we hold, and the lies we believe? The paradox suggests that our own self-understanding may not be as stable or consistent as we would like to believe. We are not always able to determine what is true about ourselves, and at times we may find ourselves trapped in a loop of contradictory beliefs and perceptions. The liar paradox also sheds light on the limitations of certainty. In a world that often demands clear answers, this paradox reminds us that some questions may not have simple resolutions. We may long for certainty, but the paradox suggests that there are situations where certainty is elusive. Truth, meaning, and logic are not always fixed, and sometimes we must learn to live with ambiguity and contradiction. The paradox challenges us to embrace uncertainty, to accept that some things may never be fully understood or resolved. The paradox also touches on the nature of belief. If we cannot be certain about the truth of a statement, what does it mean to believe in something? Belief is often seen as a commitment to truth, but the liar paradox shows that belief can be complicated. How do we know when something is true, or when our beliefs are self-contradictory? The paradox suggests that belief is not always straightforward and that it may be more complex and nuanced than we realize. As we reflect on the liar paradox, we are forced to confront the limits of our thinking and reasoning. The paradox does not offer easy answers, but it opens the door to deeper questions, questions about the nature of truth, language, logic, and self-awareness. It challenges us to accept that some contradictions may be inherent in the fabric of reality, and that our understanding of the world may always be incomplete. The paradox invites us to reconsider our assumptions about certainty and to embrace the mystery of what cannot be known. In the end, the liar paradox reminds us that truth is not always as simple as we would like it to be. It reveals the complexities and limitations of our language, our logic, and our understanding. It shows us that there are some paradoxes that may never be resolved, and that part of the beauty of life is in embracing the uncertainty, the contradictions, and the mysteries that lie beyond our grasp. The paradox of thrift is an economic concept that challenges our intuitive understanding of personal savings, national wealth, and collective prosperity. At first glance, it seems almost counterintuitive. Saving money should always be a good thing. After all, saving allows for financial security, investment in the future, and protection against unexpected hardship. But the paradox of thrift suggests that, on a larger scale, the collective act of saving can actually harm the economy as a whole, leading to negative consequences that we might not have anticipated. Imagine a society where everyone decides to save more money. People cut back on spending, tighten their belts, and put away as much as they can for the future. This seems like a prudent and responsible course of action. After all, saving is essential for individuals to secure their financial futures. But when everyone in the economy adopts this behavior at the same time, the effects become more complicated. In the short term, businesses begin to see a decline in demand. As people spend less, companies are forced to reduce production, lay off workers, or lower wages. The reduced demand for goods and services leads to a slowdown in the economy. Fewer people are employed, and the economy contracts. But this contraction seems to contradict the original purpose of saving. If everyone is saving more, shouldn't that lead to greater wealth and prosperity? Instead, the economy becomes weaker, not stronger. This is the core of the paradox of thrift. While individual savings are beneficial, when everyone tries to save more at once, it reduces the overall demand for goods and services, which in turn hampers economic growth. In other words, saving becomes a double-edged sword. The very act of saving, which seems like a prudent choice on the surface, can inadvertently lead to a decrease in income, employment, and investment. It's a paradox because what seems like a sound personal decision, saving for the future, can lead to a worse outcome for the community as a whole. The paradox of thrift forces us to confront the complex relationship between individual behavior and collective outcomes. In our everyday lives, we tend to think of economic decisions as being independent of one another. If we save money, we believe we are securing our own future and contributing to the overall health of the economy. However, the paradox suggests that this view oversimplifies the dynamic interplay between personal and collective economic behavior. When individuals save, they decrease their spending, which in turn affects businesses, workers, and the broader economy. It's a reminder that personal actions can have unintended consequences when taken collectively. At a deeper level, the paradox of thrift challenges us to reconsider our understanding of wealth and prosperity. We often think of wealth as something that accumulates over time, something we build through savings, investment, and careful management. But the paradox suggests that wealth is not just about accumulating money. It's also about maintaining the flow of resources within the economy. Without spending and investment, wealth becomes stagnant and the economy slows down. This reminds us that prosperity is not just a matter of individual accumulation. It's also about the circulation of money and resources through the economy. The health of the economy depends not only on saving, but also on spending, investment, and the exchange of goods and services. The paradox also invites us to think about the role of government in balancing savings and spending. In times of economic downturn, when private savings are rising and consumer demand is falling, governments often step in with stimulus measures, spending money to keep the economy afloat. This can be seen as an effort to counteract the negative effects of the paradox of thrift. By increasing public spending, the government can help maintain demand and prevent the economy from contracting further. The paradox, then, raises important questions about the role of government in managing economic stability and the delicate balance between saving and spending on a national scale. As we reflect on the paradox of thrift, it forces us to consider the broader implications of our individual financial decisions. While saving for the future is important on a personal level, we must also recognize that our choices are part of a larger economic system. The paradox teaches us that our actions are not isolated. They are interconnected with the decisions of others. When we save more, we may be inadvertently contributing to a slowdown in economic activity. This creates a tension between individual prudence and collective well-being, forcing us to reconsider how our actions contribute to the world around us. The paradox of thrift also reminds us that economics is not just about numbers and theories, it is about human behavior. The decisions we make, individually and collectively, are shaped by our desires, fears, and motivations. The paradox asks us to reflect on the tension between short-term security and long-term prosperity. While it is important to save for the future, we must also recognize that economic health requires balance. Saving is important, but so too is spending, investing, and keeping the flow of money circulating through the economy. The paradox raises a fundamental question. How do we balance our individual desires with the needs of the collective? It forces us to confront the limitations of our understanding of wealth, consumption, and economic growth. If everyone saves more, who will spend and invest? How can the economy continue to grow if the very act of saving reduces the demand for goods and services? Consider, too, the psychological implications of the paradox of thrift. In a society that prizes saving, we may come to view consumption as a vice, something to be avoided in favor of financial prudence. But the paradox suggests that this mentality, while valuable in moderation, can lead to unintended consequences. It invites us to reflect on the nature of economic growth and the importance of maintaining a healthy balance between saving and spending. We must question whether it is truly sustainable or desirable for everyone to save at once, or whether we need a more nuanced approach that takes into account the interconnectedness of our choices. As we contemplate the paradox of thrift, we are reminded that economic systems are complex and dynamic. They are shaped not only by individual decisions, but also by the collective behavior of millions of people. The paradox teaches us that personal choices, while important, must be understood in the context of the larger system. By recognizing the interconnectedness of our actions, we gain a deeper understanding of how economies function, and we learn to navigate the delicate balance between saving for the future and sustaining the health of the present. In the end, the paradox of thrift challenges us to rethink our assumptions about wealth and prosperity. It forces us to confront the limits of our understanding of economic growth and to embrace the complexity of the systems we are part of. The paradox is a reminder that, in the world of economics, the simplest choices can have the most profound consequences. The arrow of time. Paradox is one of the most intriguing and perplexing dilemmas in both philosophy and physics. At its core, it deals with the nature of time itself and the fundamental question of why time seems to flow in one direction, forward, rather than backward or in some other unpredictable manner. We experience time moving forward every day of our lives, but the arrow of time paradox forces us to question why this is the case and whether it is a fundamental property of the universe or something much more mysterious. The paradox is simple in its formulation, but deeply complex when explored. It's easy to think of time as a linear progression. The past is behind us, the present is now, and the future lies ahead. We live our lives with this understanding, and it feels natural to us. Events unfold in a seemingly unidirectional flow, where causes precede effects. A glass falls to the ground and shatters. A flame burns out. A person ages. These processes all move in one direction, from order to disorder, from the past into the future. But this straightforward experience raises an essential question. Why is this the case? Why does time flow only in one direction? The arrow of time. Paradox invites us to consider the possibility that time might not be as simple as it appears. In physics, the laws that govern the fundamental forces of nature, like gravity, electromagnetism, and nuclear forces, are time-symmetric. This means that, in theory, if we could reverse the direction of time, the equations governing the universe would still hold true. A glass that falls and shatters could, in theory, just as easily rise up and reassemble itself. The same applies to countless other phenomena. So why don't we observe this reversal of time in our everyday lives? One explanation lies in the concept of entropy, a fundamental principle in thermodynamics. Entropy measures the amount of disorder in a system, and the second law of thermodynamics states that entropy always increases over time in an isolated system. This increase in disorder seems to be the key to the direction of time. As time progresses, systems naturally move from a state of lower entropy, greater order, to a state of higher entropy, greater disorder. The arrow of time. Paradox, then, is intimately tied to this concept. Time's progression is not just a measure of the ticking of the clock, but also a measure of the increasing disorder in the universe. This idea of entropy provides an explanation for why we perceive time as moving forward, because the universe, in all its processes, is always becoming more disordered. The glass falls, shatters, and the pieces scatter. The flame burns and consumes fuel, spreading heat and light in the process. A person ages, experiencing wear and tear with every passing year. All of these processes are irreversible and follow the natural tendency toward greater entropy. In this sense, the arrow of time is not just a matter of how we measure time, but of how time is intertwined with the very fabric of reality. But there is still a lingering question. Why does entropy increase in the first place? Why does time's arrow point in one direction and not the other? This question leads us into the heart of the paradox. While the increase of entropy provides a satisfying answer in terms of thermodynamics, it doesn't explain why time itself has a direction. The laws of physics are not inherently tied to time's flow in one direction, yet we live in a world where time undeniably moves forward. This dissonance between the time symmetry of fundamental physical laws and the one-way flow of time is the essence of the arrow of time paradox. The paradox becomes even more perplexing when we consider the nature of time at the quantum level. Quantum mechanics, the branch of physics that governs the smallest scales of matter, suggests that, at least in certain instances, time may not behave in a strictly linear or deterministic manner. Phenomena like quantum entanglement and wave function collapse seem to challenge our conventional understanding of time's arrow. In the quantum world, events can appear to happen instantaneously, and the order of events can be fuzzy, in contrast to the clear progression we experience in the macroscopic world. Does this mean that time itself is an illusion, and that the arrow of time is merely a consequence of our limited perspective? As we reflect on the arrow of time paradox, it becomes clear that time is not just a neutral background against which events unfold. Time is a fundamental aspect of the universe, inextricably linked to the flow of events, to the changes we witness, and to the very structure of reality itself. The paradox forces us to confront the mystery of why time flows the way it does, why it feels irreversible, and whether our perception of time's direction is the same as its true nature. The arrow of time also invites us to think about the psychological and existential implications of time's one-way flow. Our experience of time is not only a physical phenomenon, it is a deeply personal one. We are born, we live, and we die within this arrow, and we feel its effects acutely in every moment. The passage of time shapes our lives, our memories, and our sense of self. As time moves forward, we accumulate experiences, face the inevitability of aging, and confront the reality of our own mortality. The arrow of time. Paradox reminds us that time is not just a backdrop to our existence. It is a force that propels us forward, inexorably, toward an unknown future. This paradox also raises profound questions about the possibility of reversing or escaping time's arrow. Could we, one day, travel backward in time, reversing the flow of events? Or would this violate the fundamental principles of thermodynamics and the increase of entropy? While time travel is a popular subject of science fiction, the arrow of time paradox suggests that such a reversal is not just a matter of science, but of deep philosophical and physical inquiry. The very possibility of reversing time forces us to reconsider the nature of cause and effect, of order and disorder, and of the linear progression of events. As we contemplate the arrow of time, we are reminded of the fundamental role that time plays in shaping our understanding of reality. Time is not just something we measure with clocks or calendars. It is a pervasive force that governs every process in the universe. It shapes the stars and galaxies, the birth and death of living things, and the rise and fall of civilizations. Time is the ultimate context within which all things unfold, yet it remains one of the greatest mysteries of existence. The arrow of time. Paradox challenges us to embrace the mystery of time. It forces us to confront the limits of our understanding and to accept that some aspects of reality may forever remain beyond our comprehension. The paradox reminds us that time, in all its complexity, is not merely something we experience. It is something that shapes and defines our very existence. As we live our lives, moving ever forward in time, the paradox invites us to reflect on the nature of the universe, the direction of our lives, and the mysterious flow of time that propels us all toward an uncertain future. The unexpected hanging paradox is a fascinating and thought-provoking conundrum, blending logic, surprise, and the nature of prediction into a single puzzle. It invites us to question our understanding of certainty and how our expectations shape reality, often in unexpected ways. At first glance, the paradox seems like a straightforward scenario, but as we delve deeper, it reveals a profound tension between reasoning and experience, leaving us in a maze of contradictions. The setup of the paradox is simple but puzzling. A judge tells a condemned prisoner that he will be hanged at noon on one weekday in the upcoming week, but the hanging will come as a surprise. The prisoner will not know the day of his execution until the executioner arrives at his cell that day. The judge's declaration appears clear, but it plants the seeds of a logical dilemma that will unfold in the prisoner's mind. The prisoner begins to analyze the situation, reasoning through the days of the week. He starts with Friday, the last possible day for the execution. If he has not been hanged by Thursday evening, he reasons, then the hanging must occur on Friday. But if he can predict that he will be hanged on Friday, it would not be a surprise, violating the judge's conditions. Therefore, he concludes, he cannot be hanged on Friday. Eliminating Friday as a possibility, he turns to Thursday. If he has not been hanged by Wednesday evening, he reasons, the hanging must occur on Thursday. But again, if he can predict this, the hanging would not be a surprise. By the same logic, he rules out Thursday. He continues this process, systematically eliminating each day of the week until he convinces himself that the hanging cannot occur at all. Relieved by his reasoning, the prisoner feels confident that he has outsmarted the judge. But the story doesn't end there. At some unexpected point during the week, perhaps on Wednesday, the executioner arrives and the prisoner is hanged, to his complete surprise. The judge's promise is fulfilled, and the paradox comes to life. The unexpected hanging paradox forces us to confront the limits of logic and how it interacts with reality. The prisoner's reasoning is impeccable, step by step, yet it leads him to a false conclusion. How can this be? The paradox hinges on the interplay between logic and surprise. The prisoner's attempt to predict the future using deductive reasoning collapses under the weight of its own assumptions. By trying to eliminate the possibility of surprise, he paradoxically ensures it. The heart of the paradox lies in the idea of self-reference. The prisoner's reasoning depends on his assumption that he can predict the judge's actions. But the very act of reasoning about the surprise changes the nature of the situation. If he could fully predict the hanging, it would no longer be unexpected. The paradox plays with this tension, showing how reasoning about a future event can interfere with the conditions that make it possible. This dilemma has broader implications, reaching beyond the prisoner's plight. It challenges how we think about knowledge, certainty, and the nature of surprises. Can we ever truly predict the future, or does the act of prediction alter the outcome? The unexpected hanging paradox suggests that certain events may be inherently unpredictable, not because of randomness, but because of the interplay between our expectations and the events themselves. Imagine applying this paradox to everyday life. Consider how we often try to anticipate outcomes, whether it's a surprise party, a plot twist in a story, or even life's larger uncertainties. The more we try to predict, the more we risk undermining the very surprise we hope to experience. Yet the paradox reminds us that life's surprises are not something we can fully control or outthink. They arise in the spaces where our reasoning falls short, offering moments of astonishment and wonder. The unexpected hanging paradox also invites us to reflect on the nature of trust and authority. The prisoner's dilemma is rooted in his belief in the judge's word. He trusts that the judge's promise of a surprise will hold true, yet his logical mind leads him to doubt its feasibility. This tension between belief and logic mirrors many of life's challenges, where we must balance trust in others with our own reasoning. There's also a deeper existential layer to this paradox. It speaks to the unpredictability of life itself. Just as the prisoner cannot foresee the exact day of his hanging, we cannot fully predict what lies ahead in our own lives. The paradox reminds us that life's uncertainties are not merely obstacles to overcome, but essential features of existence. They keep us grounded in the present, aware that no amount of reasoning can fully capture the complexity of reality. As we sit with this paradox, we might find ourselves questioning how we approach the unknown. Do we try to control it, dissect it, and eliminate all surprises? Or do we learn to embrace the unexpected, allowing it to enrich our experience of life? The unexpected hanging paradox suggests that while logic is a powerful tool, it is not the only lens through which to view the world. Sometimes, the most profound truths emerge not from certainty, but from the unexpected twists and turns that defy our expectations. In the end, the paradox leaves us with more questions than answers. Can logic truly account for every aspect of reality? Or are there moments where reasoning must give way to experience, where the unexpected becomes a necessary part of understanding? The unexpected hanging paradox challenges us to navigate the delicate balance between logic and intuition, between prediction and surprise, and to accept that some mysteries may never be fully unraveled. Zeno's arrow paradox is a puzzle that asks us to reconsider our most basic assumptions about motion and time. What could be simpler than the idea of an arrow in flight, soaring through the air toward its target? Yet, when viewed through Zeno's lens, this seemingly ordinary phenomenon becomes a profound mystery, unraveling into layers of contradiction and philosophical depth. The paradox begins with a straightforward scenario. Imagine an arrow shot from a bow. As it flies toward its target, we can freeze time at any specific instant. At that instant, the arrow is not moving. It occupies a fixed position in space. It cannot traverse any distance in a single, indivisible moment of time. If this is true for every instant in the arrow's flight, then how can motion ever occur? The arrow, it seems, is forever at rest in each frozen moment. This thought experiment challenges the very foundation of motion. In our everyday experience, motion feels real and continuous. The arrow flies, rivers flow, and people move. Yet Zeno's paradox suggests that this perception may be an illusion. If time is composed of discrete instants, and the arrow is motionless in each, then motion itself becomes an enigma, a concept that defies logical explanation. To understand the depth of the paradox, we must confront the nature of time. Is time a seamless flow, like a river, or is it made up of discrete moments, like beads on a string? If time is continuous, perhaps motion can occur as a fluid, uninterrupted process. But if time consists of individual instants, each frozen and still, then how does movement emerge? The paradox forces us to question whether motion is a property of reality or a construct of human perception. Zeno's argument also raises questions about how we measure and observe motion. In our minds, we often break motion into smaller and smaller segments. For example, we might imagine the arrow traveling halfway to its target, then halfway again, and so on, creating an infinite sequence of smaller and smaller intervals. In this view, motion becomes a series of discrete steps, each of which can be analyzed in isolation. But this approach leads to an unsettling conclusion. If each step in the sequence is static, then the sum of these steps should also be static. How then does the arrow ever reach its target? The paradox gains even more significance when we consider its implications for mathematics and physics. Centuries after Zeno, the development of calculus provided a mathematical framework to address the puzzle. Using calculus, we can describe motion as the sum of infinitely small changes over time, resolving the apparent contradiction. According to this view, the arrow's motion is not a sequence of static moments, but a continuous process that can be modeled mathematically. Yet even as calculus resolves the mechanics of motion, Zeno's paradox lingers as a philosophical question. Does solving the equations truly address the deeper mystery of what motion is? Mathematics offers a way to describe motion, but it does not necessarily explain its essence. Zeno's arrow paradox reminds us that there is often a gap between our mathematical models and the underlying nature of reality. The paradox also challenges how we think about observation and perception. When we watch the arrow fly, we perceive it as a continuous motion. But is this perception accurate, or is it a construction of our minds? If motion is an illusion, then what does this say about the reliability of our senses? Zeno's paradox forces us to confront the possibility that reality might be fundamentally different from how it appears. On a broader level, the arrow paradox raises profound questions about change and continuity. Motion is not just about objects moving through space. It is also about the passage of time, the evolution of events, and the unfolding of life itself. If Zeno's reasoning applies to the arrow, could it also apply to all forms of change? Are our lives like the arrow, composed of discrete, motionless moments that somehow give rise to the illusion of continuity? The paradox also has existential implications. It invites us to reflect on the nature of time and its role in our lives. Time feels like a constant flow, carrying us forward from one moment to the next. But what if time is not as seamless as it seems? What if it is fragmented, composed of countless instants, each isolated and still? Zeno's arrow. Paradox forces us to grapple with the possibility that time itself may be an illusion, a construct that helps us make sense of a reality that defies comprehension. As we sit with this paradox, we might find ourselves questioning the very foundations of existence. What does it mean to move, to change, to grow? Can we ever fully understand the nature of time and motion, or are these mysteries destined to remain beyond our grasp? Zeno's arrow paradox does not offer easy answers. Instead, it invites us to explore the boundaries of our knowledge, to confront the limits of our understanding, and to embrace the complexity of the world around us. In the end, the paradox leaves us with a sense of wonder and humility. It reminds us that even the simplest phenomena, a flying arrow, a ticking clock, a fleeting moment, can conceal infinite mysteries. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question our assumptions, and to see the world not as a collection of certainties, but as a tapestry of possibilities. Zeno's arrow. Paradox may never be fully resolved, but perhaps that is its greatest gift. It pushes us to think deeply, to question boldly, and to accept that some truths may forever elude us. In doing so, it offers a glimpse into the infinite complexity of reality, a complexity that is as beautiful as it is mysterious. The twin paradox is a fascinating thought experiment that emerges from Einstein's theory of relativity. On the surface, it appears to be a straightforward tale of two siblings and their divergent journeys through time. Yet as we unravel its layers, it challenges our understanding of time itself, forcing us to confront the strange and counterintuitive nature of the universe. Imagine two twins, Alice and Bob. They are born on the same day, grow up together, and live identical lives, until one day Alice decides to embark on a journey to the stars. She boards a spacecraft capable of traveling close to the speed of light, leaving Bob behind on Earth. From Alice's perspective, her journey is thrilling but brief. She zips across the cosmos, turns her ship around, and returns home, expecting to find her brother much the same as she left him. But when Alice steps out of her spacecraft, she finds a startling reality. Though she has aged only a few years during her journey, Bob has grown old. Decades have passed for him, while mere moments seem to have passed for her. The twins, once inseparable in age, now find themselves divided by time. At the heart of this paradox is the concept of time dilation, a consequence of Einstein's theory of relativity. According to relativity, time flows differently for observers moving at different speeds. The faster you travel, especially as you approach the speed of light, the slower time passes for you relative to someone who remains stationary. For Alice, hurtling through space at near light speed, time has stretched and slowed. For Bob, remaining on Earth, time has marched forward at its usual pace. The paradox arises because both twins initially seem to have equal claims about the other's experience. From Bob's perspective, it is Alice who is moving, and thus her clock should run slower. From Alice's perspective, she is stationary within her spacecraft, and it is Bob, along with Earth, that is moving away from her. If motion is relative, then why does Alice return younger while Bob grows older? The resolution lies in the asymmetry of their journeys. While both siblings experience relative motion, Alice's journey involves acceleration and deceleration, changes in velocity that break the symmetry. These shifts in motion place Alice in a different frame of reference, distinguishing her experience from Bob's. In the language of relativity, Alice's path through space-time, shaped by these accelerations, is shorter than Bob's. Her journey through time is compressed, while Bob's remains extended. This explanation may resolve the mechanics of the paradox, but it leaves us with deeper questions about the nature of time and existence. What does it mean for time to flow differently depending on one's motion? If two people can experience time at different rates, then what is time itself? Is it a universal constant, or is it a flexible dimension shaped by the fabric of space-time? The twin paradox invites us to rethink our intuitive understanding of time as something steady and uniform. In our everyday lives, time feels like a constant flow, ticking away at the same rate for everyone. But relativity reveals a stranger truth. Time is not fixed. It stretches and bends, influenced by motion and gravity, creating a reality that is far more complex than it seems. The paradox also forces us to grapple with the implications of relativity for our concept of simultaneity. When Alice and Bob reunite, they share a common moment, but their experiences of time leading up to that moment are profoundly different. It raises the question, is there such a thing as a universal now, or is every observer's experience of time uniquely their own? On a more existential level, the twin paradox confronts us with the fragility and relativity of human experience. If time can flow differently for different people, then what does it mean to share a moment, to grow old together, to measure life in years? The paradox blurs the boundaries between individual and shared realities, reminding us that our experience of time is deeply personal, yet interconnected with the universe around us. The paradox also touches on themes of separation and reunion, of journeys and the passage of time. In a way, Alice and Bob's story mirrors the human condition. We all embark on our own paths, shaped by the unique circumstances of our lives. We experience time differently, not in the relativistic sense of Einstein's equations, but in the subjective sense of memory, perception, and emotion. The twin paradox invites us to reflect on these differences, to consider how our individual journeys shape our understanding of the world and each other. As we ponder this paradox, we are reminded of the profound interconnectedness of space, time, and motion. The twin paradox is not just a story about two siblings. It is a window into the workings of the universe, a glimpse into the strange and beautiful reality described by relativity. It challenges us to think beyond our everyday experiences, to imagine a world where time is not a constant, but a variable, a dimension that bends and flexes with the contours of space-time. In the end, the twin paradox leaves us with more questions than answers. But perhaps that is its greatest gift. It invites us to wonder, to question, to explore the mysteries of time and existence. And in doing so, it reminds us that even the most ordinary concepts, a ticking clock, the bond between siblings, the passage of years, can conceal infinite layers of complexity. The twin paradox is a testament to the power of thought experiments to expand our minds and deepen our understanding. It challenges us to see the universe not as a collection of certainties, but as a tapestry of possibilities, a realm where time itself is as dynamic and mysterious as the stars. The Barber paradox is a thought experiment that seems deceptively simple at first glance. It invites us into a quaint, imagined village where an unusual barber governs the rules of grooming. But beneath its seemingly whimsical premise lies a profound, logical puzzle that challenges the very foundations of reasoning. Imagine a small village with a strict rule. The barber shaves all those and only those who do not shave themselves. At first, this arrangement appears neat and orderly. If a villager does not shave themselves, the barber steps in to take care of it. If a villager does shave themselves, the barber leaves them alone. Everything seems perfectly logical, until we ask a simple question: who shaves the barber? This is where the paradox emerges. If the barber shaves themselves, then according to the rule, they should not be shaving themselves, because the barber only shaves those who do not shave themselves. But if the barber does not shave themselves, then, by the same rule, they must shave themselves, because the barber shaves everyone who does not. The logic loops back on itself, creating a contradiction that cannot be resolved. The Barber paradox introduced by British mathematician and philosopher Bertrand Russell, is a playful yet profound exploration of self-referential logic. It forces us to confront the limits of our reasoning, highlighting how certain rules, when applied to themselves, can lead to irreconcilable contradictions. At its core, the barber paradox is not about shaving or barbers. It is about the nature of sets and self-reference. The paradox illustrates a broader problem in mathematics and logic, the challenge of defining a set that contains itself as a member. In this case, the set is the group of all people who are shaved by the barber. When the barber is included in this set, the definition collapses into a loop of contradictions. This paradox was part of Russell's broader work on the foundations of mathematics. It is closely related to what is known as Russell's paradox, which arises in set theory when we consider the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. If such a set exists, it must both contain itself, if it does not, and not contain itself, if it does. This contradiction revealed fundamental flaws in the naive understanding of sets, prompting a rethinking of mathematical logic. But beyond its technical implications, the barber paradox resonates on a more philosophical level. It invites us to question the reliability of rules and systems that seem, at first, to be logical and consistent. How often do we encounter situations where our assumptions break down under closer scrutiny? The barber paradox reminds us that even the most seemingly straightforward ideas can conceal complexities and contradictions. The paradox also serves as a metaphor for self-reference in other domains. In language, for instance, we encounter similar contradictions in statements like the liar paradox, where a sentence declares itself to be false. In philosophy, self-reference arises in questions about consciousness and self-awareness. Can the mind fully understand itself, or is it inherently limited by the fact that it is both the observer and the observed? The barber paradox echoes these deeper questions, hinting at the limits of knowledge and the intricacies of self-reflection. On a more abstract level, the barber paradox challenges us to think about boundaries and definitions. How do we draw lines between what is included and what is excluded, between what belongs and what does not? The paradox illustrates how these lines can blur, creating situations where inclusion and exclusion become entangled. It reminds us that the act of defining is not always as clear-cut as it seems. The barber paradox also holds a certain playful charm. It invites us to engage with logic in a way that is both serious and lighthearted. By framing a profound logical issue in the guise of a barber and a village, Russell transforms a technical problem into an accessible and thought-provoking puzzle. It is a reminder that philosophy and mathematics are not just about solving problems, they are also about sparking curiosity and wonder. As we reflect on the barber paradox, we might find ourselves pondering its implications for our own lives. How often do we encounter paradoxes in our daily thinking? How do we navigate situations where rules and systems fail to provide clear answers? The barber paradox invites us to embrace these moments of ambiguity, to see them not as obstacles but as opportunities for deeper understanding. Ultimately, the barber paradox leaves us with more questions than answers, but perhaps that is its greatest gift. It reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is not always about resolution. It is also about exploration, about pushing the boundaries of what we know and discovering the unexpected complexities that lie beyond. In this sense, the barber paradox is not just a puzzle. It is a doorway into the infinite intricacies of logic, language, and thought. It challenges us to think more deeply, to question more boldly, and to see the world not as a collection of certainties, but as a landscape of paradoxes and possibilities. The crocodile paradox is a curious and ancient riddle that weaves together logic, language, and trust. At first, it seems like an odd, almost humorous scenario involving a crocodile and its prey. But as we dive deeper into its implications, we find ourselves entangled in a web of contradictions that challenge the boundaries of reasoning and the nature of truth. The story begins with a crocodile that has snatched a child. As the distraught parent pleads for the child's return, the crocodile offers a chilling deal. "I will return your child," the crocodile says, "if you can correctly predict what I will do next." Faced with no other option, the parent makes their prediction: "You will not return my child." Now the crocodile is trapped in a paradox. If the crocodile returns the child, the parent's prediction that the crocodile would not return the child is proven false. But if the crocodile does not return the child, the parent's prediction is proven true, obligating the crocodile to return the child as promised. Either way, the crocodile cannot act without contradicting itself. This strange and unsettling dilemma highlights a fundamental contradiction in conditional reasoning. The crocodile's promise hinges on the outcome of the parent's prediction, but the prediction itself creates a logical loop that cannot be resolved. The crocodile, by tying its actions to the truth of the prediction, has created a situation where every choice defies the rules it has set. On the surface, the crocodile paradox might seem like a simple riddle, a whimsical puzzle from the realm of fables. But it is much more than that. It is a reflection of the limits of logical systems, particularly when self-reference and conditionality come into play. Like the liar paradox or Russell's paradox, it reveals the vulnerabilities of reasoning when it turns back on itself. At its core, the paradox challenges our assumptions about truth and obligation. What does it mean to make a promise? And how can that promise remain meaningful when it is contingent on a condition that cannot be resolved? The crocodile's deal highlights the fragile balance between language and logic, between what is said and what can actually be done. The paradox also has broader implications for how we think about truth in everyday life. We often rely on predictions and promises to navigate uncertainty, but the crocodile paradox reminds us that these tools are not infallible. In some cases, the act of prediction itself can create contradictions, entangling us in dilemmas that defy resolution. Consider the relationship between trust and logic in this scenario. The crocodile's offer, while seemingly logical, undermines the very trust required for the parent to engage with it. If the crocodile's promise cannot be fulfilled without contradiction, then how can the parent or anyone take it seriously? The paradox forces us to question the reliability of promises and the role of trust in a world where logic can falter. On a deeper level, the crocodile paradox invites us to reflect on the nature of power and vulnerability. The crocodile, despite its physical dominance, is rendered powerless by the logic of its own deal. The parent, though vulnerable and desperate, wields the paradox as a kind of intellectual weapon, forcing the crocodile into an inescapable loop. This inversion of power dynamics is a poignant reminder that strength is not always about physical might. It can also lie in the ability to question, to reason, and to expose contradictions. The paradox also has a timeless quality, echoing across cultures and centuries as a metaphor for the human condition. We all encounter situations where our expectations clash with reality, where promises and predictions lead to unforeseen complications. The crocodile paradox, in its peculiar way, mirrors these moments of tension and ambiguity. Imagine standing in the parent's shoes, faced with an impossible choice. How do you navigate a situation where every option seems to lead to contradiction? The crocodile paradox does not offer easy answers, but it encourages us to embrace the complexity of such dilemmas. It reminds us that life is not always a matter of clear choices and definitive outcomes. Sometimes the very act of questioning is more important than finding a resolution. As we ponder the crocodile paradox, we are drawn into a broader exploration of the relationship between language, logic, and reality. How do we use words to convey meaning, to make promises, to predict the future? And how do these words shape the way we understand and navigate the world? The paradox challenges us to think critically about the assumptions we bring to these questions, to see the limits of our reasoning not as failures, but as opportunities for deeper insight. In the end, the crocodile paradox leaves us with a profound appreciation for the mysteries of logic and the intricacies of human thought. It is a reminder that even the most seemingly trivial scenarios, a crocodile, a child, a desperate parent, can open the door to profound philosophical questions. And in grappling with these questions, we discover not just the limits of our understanding, but also the boundless potential of our curiosity. The stability-instability paradox is a profound and thought-provoking idea, emerging from the realms of international relations and strategic studies. It grapples with a counterintuitive truth. Situations that seem stable at one level may paradoxically create instability at another. It is a paradox that highlights the precarious balance between security and danger, between calm and chaos. At its heart, the stability-instability paradox is rooted in the dynamics of deterrence. It suggests that when two powers possess overwhelming and mutual capabilities to inflict catastrophic damage, most notably through nuclear weapons, they are deterred from engaging in full-scale war. The sheer magnitude of the potential consequences makes large-scale conflict unthinkable, fostering an overarching sense of stability. However, this very stability at the strategic level creates room for instability at lower levels. Knowing that neither side is likely to escalate a conflict to a catastrophic degree, the same actors may feel emboldened to engage in smaller, limited conflicts, believing these will not trigger a larger war. In this way, the paradox reveals a troubling truth. The existence of ultimate deterrence does not eliminate conflict, but instead displaces it to less catastrophic, yet still destructive arenas. To grasp this paradox more fully, imagine a precarious balancing act. On one side, you have the stability provided by the fear of mutually assured destruction, the deterrent that keeps the world's largest powers from total war. On the other side, you have the instability born of the freedom to act with impunity, in smaller, less consequential ways, secure in the knowledge that the ultimate threshold will not be crossed. It is a balance that feels simultaneously secure and fragile, stable and unstable. The paradox became particularly relevant during the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union each possessed vast nuclear arsenals capable of annihilating one another, and by extension, much of the world. The mutual fear of this destruction prevented direct, large-scale conflict between the two superpowers. Yet, the same era was marked by a proliferation of proxy wars, covert operations, and localized skirmishes from Vietnam to Afghanistan, as each side sought to assert its influence without triggering a global catastrophe. This pattern of behavior exemplifies the paradox in action. The very presence of overwhelming deterrence created a sense of safety that allowed for limited conflicts, even as those conflicts perpetuated instability in the regions where they occurred. The paradox exposes a grim irony. The conditions that prevent the worst outcomes can also enable a host of lesser, yet still devastating consequences. The stability-instability paradox invites us to reflect on the nature of conflict and security. It challenges the intuitive notion that greater deterrence naturally leads to greater peace. Instead, it reveals a more nuanced and unsettling truth. Stability at one level can mask or even encourage instability at another. It forces us to confront the limitations of deterrence as a strategy and to question whether true security can ever be achieved in a world marked by power dynamics and competing interests. On a deeper level, the paradox speaks to the human tendency to seek control over uncertainty. In creating systems of deterrence, we aim to reduce the likelihood of catastrophic outcomes, to impose a sense of order on the chaos of international relations. But the stability-instability paradox reminds us that these systems are not foolproof. They are subject to the unintended consequences of human behavior, to the ways in which individuals and nations exploit the gaps and ambiguities in any given framework. Consider how this paradox applies beyond the realm of geopolitics. In our personal lives, we often seek stability by establishing rules, routines, and boundaries. Yet these very measures can create new forms of instability as we push against the constraints we have imposed or fail to anticipate the ways in which others might react. The paradox reflects a universal truth. Stability is never absolute. It is always contingent, always accompanied by the potential for disruption. The stability-instability paradox also forces us to grapple with ethical questions. If the stability provided by deterrence comes at the cost of enabling smaller conflicts, what does this say about our moral responsibilities as individuals and societies? Are we willing to accept localized suffering as the price of avoiding greater devastation? Or does the paradox challenge us to seek alternative approaches to security, ones that do not rely on the ever-present threat of destruction? This paradox also highlights the limits of human foresight. While deterrence strategies may seem logical and effective in theory, the stability-instability paradox reminds us that real-world dynamics are far messier. The actions of nations, like the actions of individuals, are shaped not only by logic but also by emotion, ambition, and fear. The paradox underscores the need for humility in our efforts to predict and control the future. As we reflect on the stability-instability paradox, we are left with more questions than answers. How do we navigate a world where stability and instability are so intricately intertwined? Can we find ways to break free from the cycles of conflict that this paradox describes, or are they an inevitable part of the human condition? And what does the paradox reveal about our deepest hopes and fears, our longing for safety in an unpredictable world? The stability-instability paradox does not offer easy solutions, but perhaps its greatest value lies in the way it encourages us to think more deeply, to question more boldly, and to embrace the complexities of the systems we create. In a world where certainty is elusive and stability is always accompanied by instability, the paradox challenges us to see security not as an endpoint, but as an ongoing process, a delicate and dynamic balance that requires constant vigilance and reflection. The Fermi paradox is one of the most profound and unsettling questions humanity has ever encountered. It begins with a deceptively simple observation. In a universe as vast and ancient as ours, teeming with billions of stars and even more planets, the conditions for intelligent life must surely exist elsewhere. Yet, despite our search, we have found no clear evidence of extraterrestrial civilizations. This paradox, named after the physicist Enrico Fermi, poses a troubling question. If the cosmos is brimming with potential for life, why does it seem so silent? Where is everybody? The vastness of the universe makes the silence all the more striking. Our galaxy alone, the Milky Way, contains over 100 billion stars. Many of these stars have planets, and a significant fraction of those planets lie in the so-called habitable zone, the region where conditions are just right for liquid water and potentially life. If even a tiny fraction of these planets developed intelligent civilizations, the universe should be alive with signs of their existence. And yet, we find none. This silence is not just puzzling, it is deeply unsettling. The Fermi paradox forces us to confront the possibility that something fundamental about our understanding of life, intelligence, or the universe itself might be incomplete. Or worse, that the answers to these questions might carry existential implications for humanity's future. One of the most compelling aspects of the Fermi paradox is how it invites a wide range of potential explanations, each raising profound questions about our place in the cosmos. Some explanations suggest that intelligent life is far rarer than we assume. Perhaps the conditions for life, while abundant, rarely give rise to intelligence. Life may require an extraordinary sequence of unlikely events, a great filter that most planets never achieve. If this is true, the silence of the cosmos is not a mystery, but an inevitability, a reflection of just how improbable our existence really is. Other explanations turn their focus outward, suggesting that intelligent civilizations might self-destruct before they become capable of widespread exploration. Advanced technology, while offering immense power, also brings immense risk. Nuclear war, ecological collapse, or runaway artificial intelligence could prevent civilizations from surviving long enough to make contact. In this view, the Fermi paradox is not just a question about aliens, but a warning about humanity's own trajectory. Still, other theories propose that extraterrestrial civilizations do exist, but for reasons we cannot yet understand, they choose to remain hidden. Perhaps they adhere to a principle of non-interference, much like a cosmic version of the Prime Directive from science fiction. Or maybe their technology is so advanced that we simply cannot recognize it as a sign of life. To a colony of ants, a highway might seem like a natural formation, devoid of meaning or intent. Could we be the ants, unable to perceive the workings of a civilization far beyond our comprehension? Some explanations are even more unsettling. What if advanced civilizations actively avoid contact for fear of predation? In this scenario, the universe is not silent, but eerily quiet, like a forest where the animals know to stay hidden because predators are near. Humanity, with its broadcasts and signals, might be the naive species calling out into the dark, unaware of the potential dangers. The Fermi paradox also invites us to think about time on a cosmic scale. Civilizations might rise and fall in the blink of an eye relative to the age of the universe. Perhaps we are simply unlucky, existing in a brief moment when no other civilizations are active or detectable. Or maybe we are among the first, pioneers in a universe that has only recently become hospitable to intelligent life. The paradox forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and imagination. We are a young species, exploring a universe that stretches far beyond our grasp. Our tools, while advanced, may be inadequate for detecting the signs of life we seek. And our assumptions, that life must be like us, that it must broadcast signals or travel through space, may be blinding us to the true diversity of possibilities. Yet the silence also carries a strange beauty. It reminds us of the profound mystery of existence, of how little we truly know about the cosmos and our place within it. The Fermi paradox is not just a question about aliens. It is a mirror, reflecting our hopes, fears, and aspirations. It challenges us to think about what it means to be intelligent, to communicate, and to explore. Imagine the moment when humanity first makes contact, if it ever happens. What would it mean to know we are not alone? Would it bring a sense of connection and wonder, or would it upend our understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe? The Fermi paradox does not just ask where everybody is. It asks what it would mean if we found them, or if we never did. As we continue to search, the Fermi paradox reminds us to approach the unknown with both humility and curiosity. The silence of the universe is not an absence, but an invitation, a call to look deeper, to question more boldly, and to embrace the mystery of existence. Perhaps the answer lies just beyond our reach, waiting for the next breakthrough in science or technology. Or perhaps the answer is not out there but within us, in the way we think about life, intelligence, and the cosmos. Either way, the Fermi paradox challenges us to dream of a universe larger and stranger than we can imagine, and to confront the silence with courage and wonder. The Simpsons paradox is a fascinating and counterintuitive phenomenon, one that challenges our instincts about data, evidence, and the stories numbers tell. At its heart, Simpson's paradox occurs when a trend observed within multiple groups reverses or disappears when the groups are combined. It is a paradox that reminds us of the complexity hidden within seemingly straightforward statistics and forces us to confront the limits of our intuition. To understand the paradox, imagine a simple scenario. 2 treatments for a disease, treatment A and treatment B. In each group, say, younger patients and older patients, treatment A has a higher success rate than treatment B. Yet, when we combine the data from both groups, treatment B seems more effective overall. This contradiction is the essence of Simpson's paradox. How the same data can lead to opposite conclusions depending on how it is aggregated. At first glance, this seems impossible. How can a treatment outperform another in every subgroup, but not overall? The answer lies in the interplay of proportions, sample sizes, and the way data is weighted. In the example above, if more patients in one group received treatment B, and that group had higher success rates overall, the combined data could skew in favor of treatment B, even if treatment A was objectively better in every subgroup. This paradox is not just a quirk of numbers, it is a profound lesson about the complexity of the world we seek to understand. It shows us that context matters, that data cannot be divorced from the conditions under which it is collected and analyzed. Simpson's paradox reveals the potential pitfalls of oversimplification and the dangers of drawing conclusions without fully understanding the underlying patterns. In the real world, the implications of Simpson's paradox are far-reaching. In medicine, it could lead to misleading interpretations of treatment effectiveness. In education, it might distort evaluations of school performance. In social science, it could obscure the realities of inequality or discrimination. Whenever we aggregate data without considering the factors at play within subgroups, we risk falling into the trap of the paradox. Consider a famous example: a university accused of gender bias in its admissions. At first glance, the data seemed damning. Men were admitted at a higher rate than women. But when researchers examined the data by department, a different story emerged. Within most departments, women had higher admission rates than men. The disparity arose because women tended to apply to more competitive departments with lower overall admission rates, while men applied to less competitive ones. The aggregated data painted a picture of bias that dissolved upon closer inspection, illustrating the power of Simpson's paradox to mislead. The paradox challenges us to think critically about the assumptions we bring to data analysis. We often expect numbers to provide clear, unambiguous answers, to serve as an objective arbiter of truth. But Simpson's paradox reminds us that data is not inherently truthful or unbiased. It is shaped by the way we collect, organize, and interpret it. The same dataset can support multiple narratives, depending on how it is viewed. On a deeper level, Simpson's paradox forces us to grapple with the nature of causality. When we observe a trend, we instinctively search for explanations, causes that align with our expectations and beliefs. Yet the paradox reveals how easily our understanding can be distorted by incomplete information. It warns us against confusing correlation with causation and urges us to question the relationships we think we see. The paradox also highlights the tension between simplicity and complexity in our quest for knowledge. We crave simple answers, elegant models, and clear insights. But the world is rarely so accommodating. Simpson's paradox is a reminder that the truth is often more nuanced, more layered than we might wish. It challenges us to embrace complexity, to look beyond surface-level patterns, and to seek the deeper structures that underlie the data we encounter. Imagine applying the lessons of Simpson's paradox to everyday life. How often do we make decisions based on incomplete information, overlooking the nuances that could change our conclusions? How often do we fall prey to the allure of simplicity, accepting a convenient explanation without questioning its foundations? The paradox invites us to approach the world with humility, recognizing the limits of our knowledge and the potential for error in our reasoning. Simpson's paradox also serves as a metaphor for the human experience. Just as data can appear contradictory depending on perspective, so too can life present us with paradoxes that defy easy resolution. We are complex beings, shaped by intersecting influences and contexts. Our actions, like data points, may seem inconsistent or contradictory when viewed in isolation, but they make sense within the broader patterns of our lives. As we reflect on Simpson's paradox, we are reminded of the importance of curiosity and vigilance. The paradox does not just challenge us to think more deeply about data, it challenges us to think more deeply about the world. It calls us to question our assumptions, to seek out hidden patterns, and to resist the temptation to settle for easy answers. In the end, Simpson's paradox is not just a mathematical curiosity. It is a profound reminder of the complexity and interconnectedness of reality. It teaches us that truth is rarely simple, that context matters, and that understanding often requires us to look beyond the obvious. In a world awash with data, the lessons of Simpson's paradox are more relevant than ever, urging us to approach the information we encounter with both skepticism and wonder. The grain of millet paradox is a deceptively simple yet profound thought experiment that forces us to confront the nature of gradual change and the threshold between quantity and quality. At its core, the paradox explores how small, incremental changes can accumulate into something that, at a certain point, becomes unrecognizable from where it started. Imagine a single grain of millet, small and inconspicuous. Now, add 1 grain of millet every day. After a few days, the pile of millet is still not very significant. As the process continues, the pile grows steadily, but there is no clear point at which the pile transforms from insignificant to substantial. And yet, as the number of grains reaches a certain level, the pile begins to resemble something we would call a heap. The paradox arises from the question, at what exact point does a mere collection of individual grains of millet become a heap? If you start with a single grain and keep adding 1 grain at a time, there doesn't seem to be any clear boundary where the collection suddenly becomes a heap. The process seems to defy the way we typically think about categorization and change. This paradox challenges our perception of gradual transformation. It pushes us to think about the nature of thresholds, where small changes accumulate into something qualitatively different. If you were to ask someone at what point a pile of millet becomes a heap, they might struggle to pinpoint an exact moment. The transition between not a heap and heap seems vague, arbitrary, and yet it has real consequences when it comes to our understanding of change and categorization. The grain of millet paradox also speaks to a broader question about the nature of change itself. It raises the issue of how we define and identify change over time. Small, almost imperceptible shifts might seem insignificant on their own, but when viewed over a longer period, they can result in dramatic transformations. We see this paradox in various aspects of life, whether in nature, society, or personal development. Consider how we age. On any given day, we might not notice any change in our bodies, yet over the course of decades, the transformation is undeniable. It's a process much like adding 1 grain of millet at a time to a pile. Each grain is too small to notice, but eventually, the cumulative effect becomes significant. The paradox also reveals how our brains tend to categorize things into neat, defined boxes. We struggle with ambiguity, with things that don't fit easily into one category or another. The question of when a collection of millet grains becomes a heap is a perfect example of this struggle. In some ways, we want the world to be clear-cut, with lines that define where one thing ends and another begins. Yet, in the case of the grain of millet, those lines are blurry and the transition is subjective. This is not just a philosophical or abstract question. It has real-world applications in law, ethics, and decision-making. For instance, how do we determine when something like an accumulation of wealth becomes excessive? Or when does an individual's behavior shift from acceptable to problematic? In many cases, there is no clear threshold, and our judgments are influenced by vague, sometimes arbitrary distinctions. The grain of millet paradox reveals the limitations of our ability to pinpoint these thresholds, forcing us to confront the imprecision of our judgments. The paradox also highlights the role of context. If we were to suddenly stop adding grains of millet, the pile would cease to grow, and the question of when it became a heap would become irrelevant. It's only in the context of continued accumulation that the paradox becomes meaningful. Similarly, in life, our perceptions of change often depend on the larger context within which they occur. What seems insignificant in isolation may take on greater meaning when viewed in relation to the whole. Furthermore, the grain of millet paradox invites us to reconsider how we view progress. In many areas of life, progress is incremental and slow. We don't often see dramatic changes from one day to the next, but over time, the cumulative effect becomes undeniable. The paradox teaches us that progress is not always linear, and that even the smallest actions can eventually lead to significant results. It reminds us that growth often occurs in ways that are not immediately apparent, but that does not mean it is not happening. In a deeper sense, the paradox raises a fundamental question about the nature of existence itself. What makes something a heap, a collection, or a person? When do we cross the threshold from being something singular to something more complex? Just as a pile of millet grains eventually becomes a heap, so too do we undergo transformations that are not easily defined. The boundaries between categories are often fluid, and we may never fully grasp when or how these transitions occur. The grain of millet paradox also reminds us of the limits of language and categorization. In many ways, language is our attempt to impose order on a chaotic world. We categorize things as small or large, young or old, and try to draw clear distinctions between them. Yet, as the grain of millet paradox illustrates, these categories are often subjective and unstable. The world does not always conform to our neatly drawn lines, and sometimes the act of categorizing can obscure the richness and complexity of the phenomena we try to understand. As we reflect on this paradox, we are invited to reconsider the nature of change, progress, and transformation. The accumulation of small, seemingly insignificant events can lead to profound shifts over time. We are reminded to pay attention to the small, gradual changes in our own lives, recognizing that these incremental shifts are often the building blocks of larger transformations. In a world that often demands immediate answers and clear definitions, the grain of millet paradox challenges us to embrace ambiguity and uncertainty. It encourages us to look beyond the surface and to appreciate the quiet, incremental progress that shapes the world in ways we might not always notice. Perhaps the true value of this paradox lies not in resolving the question of when a heap begins, but in appreciating the process of accumulation itself and the beauty of gradual transformation. The sword and shield paradox is a thought-provoking concept that presents us with a powerful reflection on the nature of conflict, duality, and the contradictory forces that shape our existence. At first glance, the paradox may appear straightforward, but it quickly delves into deeper philosophical waters, challenging our understanding of defense, aggression, and the fragile nature of resolution. To understand the paradox, imagine a scenario. A person is armed with a sword, an instrument of attack, and a shield, a symbol of protection. These two objects represent opposing forces, the sword meant to strike and the shield designed to defend. Now, consider the question: can a shield protect against the very weapon it is meant to defend against? And if the sword's purpose is to attack, can it truly be wielded in a way that avoids harm? This duality, two forces that exist in tension with one another, creates a paradox. A sword, sharp and dangerous, seems incompatible with the notion of protection. A shield, designed to defend, may feel ill-suited for aggression. How can something that seeks to prevent harm coexist with something designed to inflict it? The sword and shield paradox draws attention to this contradiction and forces us to confront the ways in which defense and offense are often interwoven in complex and surprising ways. The paradox becomes even more perplexing when we consider how the sword and shield relate to one another in a dynamic conflict. In battle, the shield is not merely passive, It actively participates in the defense, absorbing or deflecting blows. Yet its presence also allows the sword to strike with greater precision, as the defender can focus on offense while relying on the shield for protection. In this sense, the shield doesn't simply protect against the sword, it enables the sword's effectiveness. In turn, the sword, when wielded properly, isn't just an instrument of destruction. It can also be a means of creating space, pushing back opponents, and creating openings for defense. The attacker and defender are not entirely separate entities. Their roles can shift and overlap in ways that blur the lines between aggression and defense. The paradox here is that both the sword and shield are tools of both offense and defense, depending on how they are used. This paradox extends beyond the battlefield and into broader aspects of life. It speaks to the duality inherent in many of the systems we create and the ways in which opposing forces can coexist. In our personal lives, we often carry both swords and shields, the tools we use to assert ourselves, defend our values, and protect our vulnerabilities. At times, we may wield our defenses so aggressively that they become offensive in nature. Similarly, our acts of aggression, whether in conflict, in competition, or in ambition, can sometimes function as a form of self-protection, guarding us against perceived threats or insecurities. The sword and shield paradox also serves as a metaphor for the paradoxical nature of power. Power, in its many forms, is often both a shield and a sword. It can protect us from harm and grant us security, but it can also be wielded in ways that harm others, imposing control and limiting freedom. Power, like the sword and shield, is not inherently good or bad. It is defined by how it is used. This duality speaks to the complexity of our moral judgments and the difficulty of drawing clear lines between defense and aggression. Consider the role of authority figures or institutions in society. Governments, for example, are tasked with both protecting their citizens and maintaining order. In the process, they may create systems of defense, such as police forces, that simultaneously serve as tools for protection and as instruments of power. Just as the sword can defend as well as attack, authority can both preserve safety and impose control. The paradox highlights the tension between these two roles and the challenges we face in trying to balance security with freedom. The paradox also forces us to reflect on the nature of conflict itself. In many ways, conflict is not simply a struggle between two opposing sides. It is a complex interaction where each side's actions shape and influence the other. A shield may seem like a passive object, but in reality, it shapes the course of the battle just as much as the sword does. Similarly, a sword, in its power to harm, can also create the conditions for peace by forcing a resolution or establishing a boundary. The paradox challenges us to see conflict not as a binary struggle, but as a dynamic process where offense and defense intertwine. The sword and shield paradox can also be applied to broader societal dilemmas, such as justice, forgiveness, and reconciliation. In these contexts, the sword can represent punishment or retribution, while the shield represents mercy and protection. These opposing forces often exist in tension. How can we seek justice without causing harm? How can we protect the innocent without becoming oppressive? The paradox compels us to grapple with these difficult questions, forcing us to consider how opposing values can coexist in the pursuit of resolution. Moreover, the paradox invites us to reflect on the psychological dimensions of conflict. We all carry swords and shields in our minds, responding to the world around us with both aggression and defense. Our emotional reactions, whether driven by fear, anger, or love, often mirror the dynamic of the sword and shield. In moments of vulnerability, we may rely on our shields for protection, but in times of strength, we may wield our swords to assert control. The paradox reminds us that our internal struggles are just as complex as external ones, and that the boundaries between defense and offense are often blurred. At its deepest level, the sword and shield paradox encourages us to reconsider the nature of balance. In a world of constant conflict and contradiction, we often find ourselves navigating between opposing forces. How can we find equilibrium between our need for security and our desire for freedom? How can we defend ourselves without becoming aggressors? The paradox invites us to explore the idea that resolution lies not in choosing one side over the other, but in understanding the interplay between the two. As we reflect on this paradox, we are reminded of the inherent complexity of life. Defense and offense, protection and aggression, are not separate entities. They are interconnected and interdependent. Just as a sword can be a shield and a shield can be a sword, so too can our actions, intentions, and values shift and evolve over time. The sword and shield paradox teaches us that the boundaries between opposing forces are often fluid, and that true resolution lies not in eliminating one force, but in understanding and navigating the dynamic relationship between them. In a world that often seeks clear-cut answers, the paradox challenges us to embrace complexity, to see conflict not as a simple struggle between right and wrong, but as a dance of forces that shape one another. Perhaps, in this recognition, we can begin to find a deeper understanding of the balance between aggression and defense, power and vulnerability, strength and humility. The hedonism paradox is a philosophical conundrum that invites us to reflect on the nature of pleasure, satisfaction, and the pursuit of happiness. On its surface, hedonism seems straightforward. The belief that pleasure is the highest good and that the ultimate goal of life is to maximize personal happiness. Yet when we look more deeply, we find that the pursuit of pleasure itself often leads to the very opposite of what it promises, an empty or unfulfilled existence. The paradox lies in the idea that the more we chase pleasure, the more elusive it becomes. At the heart of hedonism is the idea that pleasure is the ultimate end, the highest state of being. In theory, if we can accumulate enough pleasure, we should be content, satisfied, and at peace. But this theory is complicated by an unsettling reality. The more we seek pleasure directly, the more likely we are to find ourselves dissatisfied. The act of chasing pleasure often brings with it feelings of emptiness or disappointment. The pursuit of joy, in a sense, becomes its own obstacle. Consider the experience of indulgence. When we first engage in a pleasurable activity, whether it's eating a delicious meal, experiencing a thrilling adventure, or indulging in a favorite pastime, we are filled with immediate joy. But this joy tends to fade. The pleasure diminishes over time, leaving us wanting more. In our attempts to recapture that initial happiness, we often increase the intensity of our pursuits, seeking even greater thrills or deeper experiences. Yet each time, the return on our investment seems to lessen, and the happiness we gain is fleeting. This is the paradox of hedonism. The more we focus on maximizing our pleasure, the more likely we are to lose touch with the very thing we desire. The pursuit of happiness, in its relentless intensity, begins to strip away the very essence of contentment. True satisfaction often emerges not from the frantic chase for joy, but from moments of quiet fulfillment, those times when we are not actively pursuing pleasure, but instead allowing it to emerge naturally from our lives. The hedonism paradox challenges us to rethink the relationship between pleasure and happiness. In a world where the pursuit of pleasure is often seen as the ultimate goal, this paradox suggests that our most meaningful moments might be those that come without expectation. When we are not fixated on the goal of pleasure, we might find ourselves more attuned to the subtler joys of life, the simple pleasures of being present, of connecting with others, of finding peace in stillness. In some ways, the paradox calls into question the very nature of our desires. Are our desires inherently flawed because they are bound to diminish over time? Do we need to constantly renew our desires to find meaning in life? In seeking pleasure, We often set up conditions for our own dissatisfaction. As the poet John Keats once wrote, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever." Yet even beautiful things fade with time, and our need to seek out new sources of pleasure becomes a never-ending cycle of longing and disappointment. But perhaps the hedonism paradox does not merely illustrate a flaw in the pursuit of pleasure. Perhaps it points to a deeper truth about the nature of the self and the human condition. The paradox may suggest that happiness cannot be found in the things we accumulate or in the experiences we chase. Rather, it might lie in our ability to be present, to appreciate life as it is, without clinging to the belief that the next pleasure will complete us. It reminds us that contentment comes not from what we gain, but from how we relate to the world around us. The paradox also speaks to the complexity of human psychology. We often desire what we do not have, and in our striving to obtain it, we may fail to appreciate what we already possess. The pursuit of pleasure can blind us to the richness of the present moment. By constantly chasing after new sources of happiness, we lose sight of the pleasures that are already embedded in our lives. Those quiet, unassuming moments that, when fully embraced, offer a sense of peace and fulfillment. Consider how our desires shift over time. As we grow older, our tastes and preferences change. What once brought us immense joy may no longer hold the same appeal. This shift in desires highlights another layer of the paradox. Pleasure is often fleeting because it is tied to the ever-changing nature of our wants and needs. The pursuit of happiness becomes a moving target, and no amount of indulgence can hold it still. The more we try to control our desires, the more elusive they become. This paradox is not only evident on an individual level, but also in broader cultural and societal contexts. Modern society often equates success with the accumulation of pleasure and material wealth. We are told that happiness lies in more possessions, more experiences, more recognition. Yet, many find themselves caught in an endless cycle of striving, only to discover that the promise of fulfillment remains unfulfilled. The hedonism paradox asks us to reconsider our assumptions about what constitutes a good life. Is it really the endless accumulation of pleasure that leads to happiness? Or is there something deeper at play? Moreover, the paradox forces us to confront the relationship between instant gratification and long-term contentment. In a world that prioritizes quick fixes and immediate satisfaction, the hedonism paradox suggests that true happiness may require a different approach. It invites us to look beyond the temporary pleasures and seek out the deeper, more lasting forms of fulfillment that come not from the pursuit of pleasure itself, but from the cultivation of meaningful connections, personal growth, and inner peace. In reflecting on the hedonism paradox, we might come to see that the pursuit of happiness is not about maximizing pleasure, but rather about embracing the richness of life, with all its contradictions and complexities. The paradox teaches us that happiness is not something to be chased, but something to be experienced in the present moment. It challenges us to reconsider our relationship with pleasure and to seek contentment not through indulgence, but through acceptance, mindfulness, and a deeper appreciation of the world around us. Perhaps in the end, the hedonism paradox offers a profound lesson, that the key to true happiness lies not in the pursuit of pleasure, but in our ability to find joy in the fleeting moments of life, to savor the simple things, and to recognize that the greatest pleasures often come when we are not looking for them at all. The paradox of the raven is a logical puzzle that invites us to question the way we draw conclusions from evidence, urging us to examine the relationships between observation, theory, and confirmation. On its surface, it might appear to be a simple exercise in reasoning, but upon closer inspection, it reveals the complex and often counterintuitive nature of how we process information and shape our understanding of the world. The paradox begins with the principle of confirmation theory, which asserts that evidence supporting a hypothesis should strengthen our belief in that hypothesis. Consider the hypothesis: all ravens are black. At first, This seems like a straightforward claim, one that can be confirmed by observing any raven and noting its color. Every raven we encounter that is black seems to support the hypothesis, confirming that it is true. This process seems intuitive. The more black ravens we see, the stronger our belief in the hypothesis. However, the paradox arises when we begin to consider evidence that doesn't directly relate to the ravens themselves. According to the principles of logic, anything that is not a raven and is not black also provides evidence in support of the hypothesis. This seems strange, but let's break it down. If we see, for example, a green apple, we can conclude that this apple, while not a raven, is consistent with the idea that all ravens are black because it is not a raven. In other words, the observation of a green apple provides confirmation for the hypothesis all ravens are black because it does not contradict it. At first glance, this conclusion feels counterintuitive. How can seeing a green apple, an object entirely unrelated to ravens, provide any meaningful evidence for the claim that all ravens are black? It feels as though we should only be gathering evidence from ravens themselves, and yet, according to the rules of confirmation theory, every non-black object that is not a raven can technically count as supporting evidence for the hypothesis. The paradox challenges our assumptions about how evidence should be gathered and what counts as relevant information. This contradiction lies at the heart of the paradox of the raven. How can seemingly unrelated observations contribute to the verification of a hypothesis? The paradox forces us to confront the limits of our reasoning and the complexities of how we justify our beliefs. Are we truly justified in considering irrelevant objects, like green apples, as supportive evidence? Or does this reflect a deeper flaw in the way we think about evidence and confirmation? The paradox also highlights the importance of context in determining the relevance of evidence. When we observe a black raven, the evidence feels immediate and direct. It confirms the hypothesis in a clear and straightforward way. But when we observe a green apple, the connection to the hypothesis is less obvious. In a world where we are constantly bombarded with information, we must ask, how do we distinguish between evidence that truly supports our beliefs and evidence that merely coincidentally aligns with them? The paradox of the raven raises important questions about the nature of inductive reasoning and the limitations of drawing conclusions based on partial evidence. As we reflect on this paradox, we begin to see how it mirrors the process of scientific inquiry itself. In science, we often gather evidence from a variety of sources, sometimes unrelated, in an attempt to support or disprove a hypothesis. But not all evidence is equal. Some observations are more directly related to the hypothesis, while others may be less relevant or even misleading. The paradox of the raven forces us to consider how we weigh different types of evidence and whether our reasoning is truly sound when we include seemingly irrelevant observations. The paradox also speaks to the ways in which our beliefs are influenced by the evidence we encounter, whether or not that evidence is directly related to the matter at hand. We live in a world where confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that supports our existing beliefs, can lead us to accept evidence that seems to align with our views, even when it is not directly relevant. The paradox of the raven invites us to examine this tendency and to reflect on how it shapes our understanding of the world. Are we accepting irrelevant evidence simply because it feels like it supports our beliefs? In this sense, the paradox is not just a puzzle about logic, it is a mirror of our everyday cognitive processes. We often make decisions and draw conclusions based on partial information, relying on patterns and associations that may not be entirely accurate. The paradox of the raven exposes the potential dangers of such reasoning and reminds us of the importance of being vigilant in how we gather and assess evidence. The paradox also extends into philosophical discussions about the nature of evidence itself. What does it mean to confirm a hypothesis? Is confirmation a process of accumulating evidence that supports a theory, or is it about finding consistent and relevant observations that directly align with the hypothesis? The paradox of the raven suggests that confirmation is not always as straightforward as it seems. Sometimes, what appears to be evidence in support of a claim may actually be irrelevant or misleading. The paradox forces us to reconsider how we approach the process of validation and whether we can truly rely on indirect or unrelated evidence to support our beliefs. As we engage more deeply with this paradox, we come to realize that it reflects a fundamental aspect of how we engage with the world, our tendency to seek patterns, even when they may not be entirely valid. We want our beliefs to be confirmed, and we often interpret the world in a way that reinforces what we already think to be true. The paradox of the raven highlights the tension between this instinct and the more rigorous systematic approach to reasoning that requires us to question our assumptions and the relevance of the evidence we gather. The paradox also invites us to reflect on the nature of knowledge itself. How do we know what we know? The paradox of the raven suggests that our knowledge is often shaped by the evidence we choose to acknowledge, and that this evidence is not always as clear-cut or relevant as we might think. It reminds us that the process of knowing is complex, and that the way we gather and interpret evidence is far from simple. In its deeper layers, the paradox of the raven is a reflection on the complexities of inductive reasoning and the challenges of drawing conclusions based on incomplete or seemingly irrelevant information. It forces us to confront the limits of our reasoning and to ask whether we are truly justified in our beliefs, or whether we are merely constructing patterns from the noise of the world around us. In a world that often demands certainty, the paradox offers a sobering reminder of the complexity of knowledge and the need for humility in how we arrive at conclusions. Ultimately, the paradox of the raven compels us to reconsider the foundations of our reasoning processes. It challenges us to think more carefully about the evidence we accept, the patterns we draw, and the assumptions we make. It teaches us that the search for truth is not always a straightforward path, and that the process of confirmation is far more nuanced than it may initially appear. In embracing this complexity, we gain a deeper understanding of the nature of knowledge, evidence, and the human capacity for reasoning. The Ship of Theseus paradox is a thought experiment that forces us to confront questions about identity, change, and continuity. The paradox is deceptively simple. If a ship, the Ship of Theseus, has all of its components replaced over time, is it still the same ship? And if every part is eventually replaced, at what point does it stop being the Ship of Theseus? This paradox challenges us to think about what constitutes the essence of an object, a person, or even a life. Is identity tied to the specific parts that make something up, or is it defined by something deeper, something less tangible? The paradox begins with the premise that the Ship of Theseus, an ancient vessel, is gradually repaired by replacing its rotting or damaged parts with new identical ones. Over time, every single part of the ship, the planks, the sails, the mast, has been replaced. Eventually, there is nothing left of the original ship except for the idea of the ship itself. And yet, the ship is still called the Ship of Theseus, as though it remains the same ship it always was. But here's where things get complicated. What happens if all the discarded parts, the original planks, the original sails, are collected and used to build another ship? This second ship would contain all the original components of the Ship of Theseus, while the first ship is made up entirely of new parts. Which one is the real Ship of Theseus? Is it the one that maintains its name, even though it no longer contains any of the original components? Or is it the ship that contains all the original parts, even though it was only built after the original ship was dismantled? The Ship of Theseus paradox asks us to think about identity not as something fixed and static, but as something that is fluid and contingent. It forces us to ask what it means for something to remain the same over time. Is it the continuity of the form that defines identity, or is it the consistency of the material parts? Or perhaps, Is identity simply a product of our perception and understanding, a mental construct that allows us to impose order on a world that is constantly in flux? This paradox is not merely an abstract thought experiment. It mirrors real-world dilemmas we encounter daily. In many ways, the paradox is a metaphor for human life itself. Over the course of a lifetime, our bodies undergo constant change. Our cells regenerate, our skin sheds, and our organs wear down and are replaced by medical interventions. And yet, we maintain a sense of continuity, a feeling that we are the same person, despite the fact that no two cells of our body are identical to the ones we had years ago. The Ship of Theseus invites us to reflect on this sense of continuity. What makes us who we are? Our physical bodies, our memories, or something else entirely? At a deeper level, the paradox raises questions about the nature of change itself. We tend to think of identity as something stable, something that persists through time. But when we look closer, we see that change is the only constant. Every object, every living being, is constantly undergoing transformation. The Ship of Theseus reminds us that nothing in life remains exactly the same, and yet, we often insist on defining things by their original form. This tension between stability and change is at the heart of the paradox and lies at the root of many of our philosophical, ethical, and existential questions. The Ship of Theseus also challenges our concept of ownership and authenticity. If a ship is repaired over time, at what point does it cease to be the original ship? If every part is replaced, is the ship still authentic, or is it a mere imitation of its former self? And if the original parts are reassembled into a new ship, is that ship more authentic than the one that carries on the name, despite being made of entirely new components? This tension between originality and replication speaks to a deeper anxiety we have about authenticity in a world where things are constantly being recreated, redesigned, and reinterpreted. The paradox also offers insights into how we think about change in the context of personal growth. Consider the idea of a person growing over time, learning, evolving, experiencing. If every part of our personality, our thoughts, and even our memories were to change over the years, would we still be the same person? The Ship of Theseus suggests that our identity might be more about the overall continuity of our experience, the narrative we create about ourselves, than about any fixed set of characteristics. This understanding forces us to rethink how we view ourselves and others. Perhaps we are not defined by our individual parts, but by the totality of our experiences and relationships. One of the most profound implications of the Ship of Theseus paradox is its challenge to the notion of permanence. In a world that values constancy and stability, the idea that something can change so completely and still be considered the same is unsettling. We live in a culture that prizes the idea of originality, but the paradox reminds us that originality is often a fleeting, ephemeral concept. The world around us is in constant flux, and nothing remains fixed for long. Perhaps the paradox invites us to rethink our attachment to the idea of permanence, to accept that change is inevitable, and that true identity might lie in the continuity of change itself, not in any fixed or stable form. In a broader context, the Ship of Theseus paradox invites us to reflect on the nature of society and culture. Like the ship, societies evolve and transform over time, with institutions, customs, and beliefs being replaced, reformed, or abandoned. And yet, we continue to call the same society by the same name, even as it changes. This raises the question, is a culture or a society still the same if everything that once defined it is replaced? Is the continuity of the idea itself enough to maintain its identity, or must there be a direct connection to its original form? This paradox also intersects with concepts of memory and history. As we change, we often hold on to the stories of our past, our memories, our heritage, our traditions. Yet these are often incomplete, modified, or reconstructed over time. Just as the ship of Theseus is a vessel of transformation, so too are our personal and collective histories. The paradox invites us to think about the role of memory in constructing identity. If the original parts of our memory are lost or altered, does that mean we are no longer the same person? Or does the story we tell about ourselves preserve our continuity despite the changes? The ship of Theseus also raises questions about the nature of time itself. If an object can change so completely and yet remain the same, what does that say about the way we perceive the passage of time? The paradox suggests that time is not simply a linear progression, but a dynamic force that continuously reshapes us and the world around us. Our understanding of time and change is deeply interconnected, and perhaps the ship's transformation represents the way in which time shapes us, constantly reconstituting who we are without ever losing the essence of who we were. Ultimately, the ship of Theseus paradox challenges us to think differently about identity, change, and continuity. It asks us to question what makes something, be it a ship, a person, or a culture, the same over time. Is it the material components, the continuity of form, or the narrative we construct around it? In a world where everything is subject to change, the paradox reminds us that the search for permanence might be a fruitless one. Instead, we might find meaning in embracing change itself, recognizing that identity is not something fixed, but a process of continuous transformation. The value paradox is an intriguing and often unsettling concept that challenges our understanding of worth, meaning, and significance. At its core, the paradox asks, how can something be simultaneously invaluable and invaluable at the same time? It highlights the contradictions inherent in our perceptions of value, both in the world around us and in our own lives. It forces us to reconsider how we assign value to things, people, and experiences, and whether value is truly intrinsic or if it is something we impose through our own subjective frameworks. The paradox begins with a simple yet profound observation. We often value things based on what they cost us, whether it's our time, our resources, or our emotional energy. Take, for instance, an object that is seemingly invaluable because it is rare or difficult to acquire. A rare painting, a piece of precious jewelry, or even a fleeting experience. These things can be deemed valuable because they are scarce, expensive, or difficult to obtain. In this sense, value is defined by exclusivity, by what is not easily accessible. But here's the paradox. The more we value something based on its rarity or scarcity, the more we risk devaluing it in a different sense. As something becomes more sought after, its intrinsic worth can be clouded by the pursuit of ownership, by the need to possess it. Suddenly, it's no longer the thing itself that is valuable, but the idea of possessing it. What once held intrinsic meaning, a painting created by an artist, a serene moment in time, or an object of personal significance, can become merely a symbol of status or wealth. The original value, the deeper connection we might have had to that object, can be obscured by our desire to own, collect, and display it. In this way, the value paradox reflects a tension between subjective value and objective value. It's easy to think of value as something fixed, something tangible that exists independently of our perceptions. But when we consider how we value things based on supply and demand, social status, or individual desire, we begin to realize that value is fluid. It shifts depending on how we see it, how others perceive it, and how the world around us interacts with it. The paradox makes us question whether anything truly has value in itself, or whether value is simply a construct, a projection of our own needs, desires, and social contexts. The paradox grows even more perplexing when we think about how we assign value to people. We often place value on individuals based on their achievements, their social standing, or their ability to provide something of worth to us. But this can lead to a sense of commodification, where people are valued not for who they are, but for what they can do for us, or what they represent.
The more we try to measure value in terms of utility, the more we risk reducing individuals to mere tools, valuable only in the ways they contribute to our own lives or to society at large. In the context of relationships, the value paradox raises the question of what makes someone valuable. Is their value determined by their role in our lives, by their ability to fulfill certain needs or desires, or is there something intrinsic about each person that makes them valuable, regardless of their contributions or utility? This is a delicate balance. On one hand, it's easy to see how people can be assigned value based on the roles they play or the things they do for us. On the other hand, there's a more profound understanding that value should not be tied only to usefulness. People are not mere objects to be consumed or exploited. True value, it could be argued, lies not in what someone does for us, but in their inherent dignity and humanity. This paradox also extends to the concept of time. How do we value time? We often think of time as a resource, something finite that must be managed, spent wisely, and saved for the future. But in doing so, we can lose sight of time's intrinsic value, the simple experience of being present, of existing in the moment. As we rush to maximize time, to squeeze as much productivity or pleasure out of every second, we risk forgetting that the value of time lies not in its efficient use, but in its pure, unquantifiable quality. The more we focus on how to use time, the more we diminish its inherent worth, by reducing it to a commodity, rather than appreciating it for the experiences and memories it allows us to create.
The value paradox also intersects with our understanding of what is truly essential in life. We tend to place the highest value on material possessions, on wealth, and on achievements that can be measured and quantified. But what if the most valuable things are the intangible ones, the moments of quiet reflection, the acts of kindness, the small, seemingly insignificant moments that often go unnoticed? These things don't have a price tag attached to them. They can't be traded or sold, and yet they often provide us with a sense of fulfillment that no material possession ever could. The paradox here is clear. What we often value the most, the things we seek to acquire and hold on to, is not necessarily the most valuable in the grand scheme of our lives. True value may be found in the simplest of things, in the unnoticed, the unmeasurable, and the often overlooked. This tension between intrinsic value and assigned value speaks to a deeper truth about the human condition. We are creatures of perception, and our value systems are shaped by a combination of cultural forces, personal desires, and social pressures. The things we value are often not inherently valuable. Rather, they are valuable because we make them so. This realization can be disorienting. If value is something we create rather than discover, does it mean that we have the power to reshape our own world, to redefine what is truly important in our lives? Or does it mean that value is an illusion, a fleeting and unreliable construct that can never fully satisfy our search for meaning? The paradox also asks us to reflect on the way we navigate our own lives. How often do we define our self-worth by external measures, by our career, our possessions, our relationships? How often do we place value on things because they are seen as valuable by society, without questioning whether they truly matter to us on a deeper level? The value paradox encourages us to examine our motivations, to question why we value the things we do, and to reflect on the possibility that value is not something we should chase, but something we should understand and embrace in its purest, most authentic form. Ultimately, the value paradox invites us to reconsider our assumptions about worth. It reminds us that value is not fixed. It is shaped by our perceptions, desires, and social contexts. In a world that often encourages us to chase after things that promise to give us value, money, status, success, we are reminded that the things that truly matter cannot be bought or sold. True value is often hidden in plain sight, in the intangible experiences and moments that make life meaningful. And perhaps the greatest paradox of all is that by seeking value in the wrong places, we may miss the very things that are most valuable of all. The Stockdale paradox is a powerful and thought-provoking concept that emerged from the experiences of Admiral James Stockdale, a United States Navy officer who was imprisoned for over 7 years during the Vietnam War. The paradox is a lesson in resilience, hope, and the human spirit's ability to endure even in the most unimaginable circumstances. It offers profound insights into how we navigate adversity and the balance we must strike between realism and optimism when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges. The paradox itself is deceptively simple, but holds deep layers of meaning. Stockdale, when reflecting on his time in captivity, observed that the prisoners who fared the worst were those who were overly optimistic, those who believed that they would be rescued at a specific time and clung to that belief with an almost dogged persistence. They set a date for their liberation, and, when that date passed, they would become disillusioned, depressed, and sometimes even collapse into despair. Their optimism, while initially sustaining, ultimately proved to be a liability because it was not grounded in the reality of their situation. On the other hand, Stockdale found that those who survived the longest were those who could confront the brutal facts of their captivity without losing hope. They did not deceive themselves with false optimism, but neither did they abandon hope altogether. Instead, they maintained a pragmatic, clear-eyed understanding of their circumstances, while still believing that they would eventually prevail. Stockdale himself was a prime example of this balance. He survived not by clinging to hope without foundation, but by accepting the harsh truth of his situation while continuing to maintain faith in his ability to survive. This balance, the ability to confront reality as it is, while holding on to the belief that you will ultimately prevail, is the essence of the Stockdale paradox. It is a paradox because it asks us to hold two contradictory ideas in our minds simultaneously. On one hand, we must acknowledge the reality of our circumstances, however difficult or painful they may be. On the other hand, we must continue to believe that we can overcome those circumstances, even if the path ahead is unclear or uncertain. The paradox teaches us that the ability to survive and thrive in the face of adversity depends not on denying reality, but on embracing it fully while also cultivating hope. The paradox also highlights the importance of adaptability. Stockdale's ability to endure was not based on a rigid, unwavering belief that everything would work out in the end, but on his ability to adjust his mindset to the ever-changing circumstances of his captivity. He didn't allow himself to become stuck in any one narrative about his situation. He was open to change, to new possibilities, and to finding creative ways to endure each day. In this sense, the Stockdale paradox invites us to embrace uncertainty and change, to remain flexible in our thinking, and to keep hope alive even when the future feels unpredictable. In a broader sense, the Stockdale paradox can be applied to many aspects of life. We all face challenges and setbacks, whether in our personal lives, our careers, or our relationships. And much like Stockdale, we often find ourselves confronted with situations that are beyond our control, where the future seems uncertain and the road ahead unclear. The paradox asks us how we respond in these moments. Do we succumb to despair, losing hope and giving up when things get tough? Or do we find the strength to confront the truth of our circumstances while holding on to the belief that we can change, that we can adapt, and that we can ultimately overcome? This is particularly relevant in times of crisis, whether it's a personal struggle, a global event like the COVID-19 pandemic, or any other form of hardship. The Stockdale paradox teaches us that resilience doesn't come from ignoring the reality of our challenges, but from acknowledging them fully and choosing to persevere in spite of them. It suggests that the key to overcoming adversity lies not in optimism alone, but in a balanced understanding of the situation and a steadfast belief in our ability to find a way through. The paradox also raises deep questions about the nature of hope itself. What is hope? And how does it function in our lives? Is hope a force that helps us transcend our difficulties? Or is it merely a coping mechanism that helps us endure in the face of suffering? Stockdale's experience suggests that hope is not just about waiting for a better future. It is about actively engaging with our present reality, even when that reality is uncomfortable or painful. Hope, in this sense, is not passive. It's a commitment to survival, to adaptation, and to finding meaning in the midst of hardship. One of the most striking aspects of the Stockdale paradox is its ability to apply not only to extreme situations, but to everyday challenges as well. In our daily lives, we often encounter difficulties that feel overwhelming, whether it's the pressure of deadlines, the weight of responsibilities, or the strain of personal or professional struggles. It's easy to fall into a mindset of all or nothing thinking. Either things will work out exactly as we hope, or we've failed. But the Stockdale paradox teaches us that success is not defined by a clear, linear path from difficulty to triumph. Instead, it's defined by our ability to face the difficulties head-on, to remain adaptable, and to keep moving forward, even when the end goal seems distant or uncertain. The paradox also invites us to reflect on our own expectations and the narratives we create around our struggles. How often do we set ourselves up for disappointment by expecting a smooth, predictable journey? How often do we overestimate our ability to control outcomes, only to become disillusioned when things don't go according to plan? The Stockdale paradox challenges us to let go of the illusion of control, to accept uncertainty, and to find strength in the present moment, even when we can't predict what the future will hold. In the end, the Stockdale paradox is a profound reminder of the complexity of human resilience. It teaches us that survival does not depend on avoiding pain or struggle, but on confronting those struggles with clarity, adaptability, and a belief in our own capacity to overcome. It shows us that the key to thriving in the face of adversity is not found in rigid optimism, but in a deeper, more nuanced understanding of our reality. A reality that acknowledges both the difficulties we face and the potential for growth and transformation that lies within us. And perhaps most importantly, the paradox teaches us that hope is not a naive expectation of perfection, but a resilient force that sustains us even in the most uncertain and challenging times. The card paradox is a curious and perplexing concept that challenges our understanding of probability, chance, and perception. On the surface, it may seem like a simple puzzle, but as we dig deeper into the paradox, it begins to reveal profound insights into how we interpret uncertainty, how we engage with randomness, and how we confront situations where our expectations clash with reality. The paradox begins with a seemingly innocent scenario. Imagine you have a deck of cards, and you're told that there is a hidden rule governing which cards are placed face up or face down. Let's say that you're asked to guess a specific pattern, perhaps the identity of a particular face-up card, or the number of face-down cards that match a certain criterion. But here's the catch. As you try to make sense of the situation, the information you have doesn't quite line up with the pattern you expect. The randomness of the arrangement seems to defy your ability to make an informed guess. The paradox arises from our perception of how randomness should behave. In the world of probability, we tend to think that outcomes will follow a predictable path based on the information we have, especially when it comes to something as seemingly structured as a deck of cards. After all, cards are finite and distinct objects, and their arrangement should be governed by rules, even if those rules are hidden from us. But the card paradox forces us to confront the possibility that randomness doesn't always work the way we expect, and that our assumptions about what is knowable and predictable can often be flawed. At its heart, the card paradox is a reflection on how we engage with uncertainty. It challenges us to think about the limitations of our understanding when we confront randomness, and to question whether we can ever truly make sense of the world around us. We tend to want certainty in our decisions, to believe that with enough knowledge and information, we can predict the outcome of any situation. Yet the paradox reminds us that sometimes, no matter how much we try to control the narrative, there are forces at play that lie beyond our comprehension. One of the key elements of the card paradox is how it explores the conflict between perception and reality. In theory, a deck of cards is a relatively simple system. There are 52 cards, each with a specific suit and rank, and they can be arranged in any order. But the moment we try to impose a pattern on that arrangement, we are met with uncertainty. No matter how much we study the cards or how hard we try to deduce their arrangement, the randomness of the situation can elude us. This creates a tension between what we believe we should be able to know and what we can actually understand. The paradox teaches us that our expectations often shape how we interpret randomness, and that we may never fully know the true nature of the situation until we are able to step back and let go of our preconceived notions. This tension between expectation and outcome mirrors many of the challenges we face in life. We often try to predict the future, to plan for every possible outcome, and to control every aspect of our environment. But no matter how much effort we put into anticipating the next step, there are always unknowns. Life, much like the arrangement of cards, is governed by chance and uncertainty. And no amount of planning or strategy can eliminate the element of randomness that lurks beneath the surface. The card paradox serves as a reminder that, despite our best efforts, we cannot escape the randomness of life. We can only engage with it, interpret it, and learn from it. Moreover, the paradox raises important questions about the role of patterns in our lives. We have an inherent tendency to seek patterns and order, even in chaotic or random situations. When we encounter a deck of shuffled cards, our minds instinctively try to find a structure, a logic that underpins the randomness. We search for a hidden rule or a meaningful pattern that will allow us to predict the next card, the next move, or the next event. This is a natural response. Our brains are wired to make sense of the world by identifying patterns. But the card paradox challenges this instinct, suggesting that not all systems are governed by predictable rules. Sometimes randomness exists for its own sake, and no amount of searching will reveal the deeper order we expect. The paradox also speaks to the idea of knowledge itself. What do we truly know when faced with uncertainty? Can we ever know enough to predict outcomes with any degree of certainty? In the case of the card paradox, we may have some information, perhaps the suits of the cards or the number of face-up cards, but we are still left with an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. The more we try to make sense of the situation, the more we realize how little we actually know. This speaks to a deeper truth about the nature of knowledge. It is always partial, always incomplete, and always subject to the limitations of our perception. We can never know everything, and we must be comfortable with that uncertainty. The card paradox also invites us to reflect on the role of chance in our lives. In many ways, life is like a deck of cards, filled with randomness and uncertainty, where outcomes are often beyond our control. But while we can't always control the randomness, we can control how we respond to it. The paradox teaches us that, rather than fighting against randomness or trying to eliminate it from our lives, we can learn to live with it. We can embrace the uncertainty, make the best of the cards we've been dealt, and adapt to whatever comes our way. By accepting the randomness, we can find peace in knowing that, although we cannot predict every outcome, we have the strength to face whatever challenges lie ahead. The card paradox also touches on the way we approach decision-making. When we make choices, we often rely on probabilities and patterns to guide our actions. But how do we make decisions when the odds are unknown, or when we cannot discern a clear pattern? This is where the paradox becomes especially poignant. It forces us to confront the limits of our decision-making processes and to accept that some decisions may be guided by pure chance. The paradox teaches us that, in many cases, the best we can do is act with the information we have at hand without expecting the world to align with our desires or predictions. Ultimately, the card paradox serves as a reminder of the complexity of life, the limits of our understanding, and the unpredictability of the world around us. It challenges us to reconsider our relationship with randomness, to question our assumptions about what is knowable, and to embrace the uncertainty that exists in every decision we make. By accepting that we can never fully control the outcomes, we are freed to live more fully in the present moment, to find meaning in the unpredictability, and to discover new paths forward even when the pattern is unclear. The card paradox may never offer a straightforward solution to the problems it raises, but perhaps that is its greatest gift. The invitation to accept the randomness of life and to find wisdom in the uncertainty.